the mighty jungle, the poodle sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the poodle and corgi sleep. Ooh, fluffy, fluffy fluffs. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the poodle and corgi sleep. Hello, everyone. How you doing? So, starters, please don't take this the wrong way, but I'm going to do pills live on air. It's always fun when you do that. Please note, the reason I'm doing the pills is because they're painkillers. And so I'm going to take some, basically paracetamol. Please note I'm saying basically paracetamol. They may not be exactly paracetamol. Because I'm right-handed. And so, as a rule, when it comes to using mouse, etc., and lifting a glass, and despite me having the injection in the left arm, for some reason, I have every single time I have had a COVID vaccine, in any way, shape, or form, I have ended up with shooting pains up and down my right side. I've ended up with my right shoulder feeling like someone's actually dislocated it, and I've experienced that one in the past. So that's not hyperbolic, me saying that. It's the pain level is the same. And for some reason, my hip feels like I'm... Well, we won't go there. But anyway, so if this is at weird angles, or moves around, please note I put it on one-handed. I use my left hand, which is my non-dominant, but I do try and do things with it occasionally hand. So, apologies if it does crazy angles. Right. So, as I've just taken pills, washed down, of course, with iron brew, I'm going to also have a Christmas pudding. Or anyone thinks this is a whole Christmas pudding, it's a Cadbury's Christmas pudding. So it's a chocolate ball. Right then, let's see, who have we got here today? Hello, everyone. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, Albazaski. Hello, Knight6831. Enjoy the, well, enjoy the racing. And 35 members, I'm glad to hear that you've donated this chat in time for this. I have no idea why, but thank you to please send my thanks to him. Hello, Frank Sado. Hello, Albazaski. I'm not quite sure on that. If mobile phones are produced in England, their top model will be named the BlackBerry. No. Considering how the British like to name things, it'd probably be called the phone. Next one up, let's see. Can you go over how to protect against sun coughs? I assume these electronic storms. What would it take to recover from something like that? Now that is one of those interesting questions. When the sun decides to have a bad hair day, or just have a stressy day, it sometimes releases these huge solar flares. Now, people see the bright bit of solar flare, the plasma coming out, and go, "Ooh, isn't that pretty?" And it is pretty. Don't look at it directly; it can blind you, but it's pretty to see if you can dial down the brightness a bit. But what it also releases is a huge wave of electromagnetic radiation, and basically consider an EM weapon the scale of which we are not able to contemplate even the construction of. Now, we have been hit by these in the past. when we were less technologically advanced. And they have done things like take out entire national grids. So you can't really protect against it. Well, you can, but to protect against it, because it's once in 100, once in 1,000 years, I'm just going, is economically cost prohibitive. What you instead have to do is you have to harden the things you can and put in redundancy. This is why I believe all hospitals should guarantee, not even just for normal emergencies, should have a full power supply, etc., that they can run independently. Backup diesel generators, those sort of things. The interesting thing is going to be how we green this. How do we have some form of system which is EM secure, electromagnetic secure, but is environmentally friendly? Now, you're not going to harden the power lines. I'm sorry. It's too expensive. But there are some quite interesting ideas around various other forms of protection you can do to them. And yes, I am going to move my iron brew to my left side. Ow. 9681, yes, I've seen your massive carrier question from Eric Groves, Vanguard to Trident. And my thing is, I'm going to respond to that with an actual video about it, because it is a massive question. So 96831, I will do a little video about that. And I might do a little, combine that with a little video I have, because I have a PowerPoint produced on a cool Dreadnought design I've come up with on Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, which I might share with people. But basically, you can't protect against sun coughs or solar flares. You can mitigate them. But protection against them, that would require you being probably able to generate something in the way of an electromagnetic shield. So something a la Star Trek. Hello Shumi, hello DG40. I've got a couple of books to go through tonight. I'm afraid, again, because of the arm and because, honestly, I spent quite a lot of yesterday evening and today feeling very, very achy and trying to walk dogs, etc. I haven't really organised piles of books like I normally do. So I've got some books sitting here, which are some very cool books, and I think you will enjoy them greatly. And I've got some more books not far away, which will probably be grabbed and put down here. But, yeah. Not overwhelmed with the number of books today. Apologies for that. Although, I'm not sure. I think Dragonfell might have been here nicking books. There's a book disappeared, which I was going to talk about. He's either nicked it before he's gone away, or I put it down somewhere. Let me just see if I can find it, because it's a book I want to talk about today. Not that one, not that one, not that one. That's not that one. Where has it gone? Where has it gone? Now, where did I put it? Still taking it on me? In which case, that's a long way to go. No, that one. Not that one. We'll get there. We'll track it down. It's probably not that far away. It's probably within hand grabbing range. But the question is, where is it within hand grabbing range? Right. Nice experience. So, answered that one. Hello, Shimmy. Hello, DG40. Hello, Yickers. Hello, Jonathan Burrow. Hello, Effenhund. Hello. Hello, Night Heron Productions. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, Sean V. Hello, Phil Williams. Nice experience. Victorious Air Wing was predicted after 1954 modernizations was 20 Hawker Seahawks, 10 de Havilland Sea Venom, 10 Western Wyverns, and 10 Ferry Gannets, and 4 Douglas ADO Sky Raiders forts. Seems about practical. Interruptions. Be careful, Doctor. YouTube doesn't like that kind of talk. It's stupid, I agree, but be careful. I'm presuming the one about me having to pop paracetamol. That's why I gave people a lot of discussion about it. Hello, Stafford. Seamunch then buried the power lines in rich neighborhood. Well, that might help, but you also have to put some concrete over them because you'd be surprised at how much damage the electromagnetic. Let's put it this way: burying is often the solution people come up with until they realize that actually the radiation can penetrate them. Interestingly enough, it even damaged undersea cables. The Carrington one, 1856, even took out some of the undersea cables, which we would normally suggest that, in our experience of salt water, and it would protect it, but it didn't. Hello, Dejan Gorosk. Hello. Nice to hear. Probably the RN has more carriers. If Victorious's build goes to plan, then probably they start in on Implacable and Indefatigable. Probably not Illustrious. Sorry about that, but Illustrious has suffered too much freaking damage. But probably Implacable and Indefatigable. Maybe Indomitable. And probably that becomes your 4 cornerstone carriers. I have a presentation about the ethical aspects of using AI in modern naval warfare. I'd like to have a quote from you there. Can I get a quote? Yes, you can. The ethics of using AI in naval warfare. Well, the problem is, if you choose not to use it because you think it gives you too much of an advantage, you're therefore putting the lives of your sailors as valuing them less than the enemy's valuing their sailors, because you're presuming your counterpart won't do the same. And the trouble is, the first rule of history, if we look through it, is biological weapons weren't used in the Second World War as much as they were, and chemical weapons in the Second World War, because both sides had them. So it was mutually assured destruction. The trouble is with AI, is it's very difficult to define what is AI and what isn't. Especially at the moment. Modern AI is, when you're looking at it in terms of pragmatic terms, is machine learning and very, very high-speed computing. Missiles which can perhaps adapt to an enemy's defenses. All these things. They're going to give an edge. Because at the moment, if you consider it, the main edge that we can give a fighter plane that has a crewed fighter over an uncrewed fighter is the human in the cockpit and the randomness they introduce. Humans don't always choose the perfect solution. That makes them illogical and unpredictable within a scenario. So you are left with a simple choice with AI. If you choose not to implement it, because you decide ethically it's too dangerous, that's fine. But you have to be damned sure no one else is going to do it. Which is also the interesting thing when we look at Star Wars, Star Trek, actually more than Star Wars. When we look at Star Wars, the AIs get all sorts of weird things, and they do have huge rules for how to maintain droid armies, how they have to be scrubbed, and all those things. But for Star Trek, you of course have the Romulans, who don't go for really advanced computers, AI, and the Federation, who are sort of obsessed with it and go really, really far for it. Holographic crewmen and all that things to one side. If you were thinking about it, if it wasn't for the Federation being quite so honest about cloaking, with their advanced tech and their computing power, choosing not the cloaking is what gives the Romulans the ability to actually stay in the fight with the Federation. Otherwise, their ships will be outpaced and outsmarted every single time, because the crews in the Federation ships are assisted by a huge amount of commuting power. And ships which are, well, not sentient, but certainly capable of a huge breadth of calculations. As an electronics engineer with a lot of experience in shielding, anything can be shielded if done properly even against the impulse. I agree, Steve, it can be, but it's against a certain value of electromagnetic pulse. And there's also a problem that once you start connecting something like a national grid, etc., you're dealing with a lot of connections. You're dealing with a lot of different systems. And my personal belief of what happened with the underwater cables was that, in the Carrington incident, was that the surface cables, the ones closer to the surface or actually on the surface, got saturated with so much EM, it hit the undersea ones as well, and overloaded them. And it's funny to think of a cable getting overloaded, but that's what I think happened. So you're talking about shielding not just the neighborhood, not just the country, but an entire world to the highest possible degree, because the sheer amount of EM you're dealing with. That's going to be very, very expensive. That's going to be Green Revolution expensive. And they're already paying for the Green Revolution. I'm not sure if they can afford to pay for both. So what they'll do, and what is sensible and what everyone's probably going to policy on, is building for the critical stuff, backstop it. I.e., you have got power supplies, you have got extra communications gear, you have got internal facilities that can substitute to an extent. But we haven't had a major EM flare in such a long time that we're due for one. And that's something which is fun. Frank Soda, Dr. C, could you also go over the usefulness of the Leander class frigate design? Basically, it's numbers. It's building something with the intent of upgrading it once you have money. It's getting ships in the water. Unfortunately, this idea has infected the entire British construction policy ever since. Hence, ships are built for, not with. Ugh. So it's a good idea, but honestly, they could have done with being slightly bigger. It would have made them far easier to upgrade. And yes, someone is doing fireworks again. 1981. Is Pax Americana over? How useful is it to look back at Pax Britannia? Depends on your definition of what they are. Is America the most powerful nation in the world? Probably. Yep. Yes, still. Was Pax Britannia? Britain was the most powerful nation in the world. Pretty much, yep. Was Britain not challenged while Pax Britannia existed? Yes, it was. Regularly. For entire wars. There is an idea that Pax Americana, Pax Britannia means you're so powerful no one fights you. That tends to be wrong. It actually means you're powerful enough that you can set the agenda. At the moment, I would say America can still set the agenda. So it's not over yet. Jonathan Murray, do you read any fiction books? If so, yet there's an entire variations of these Bruships which have been on sci-fi books. Regularly do they come up. I have a lot of them saved around me. Where is that book? I know it's rude of me to turn my back, but ah, yes, there you go. Oh, ow! Again, someone please remind me to stop using my right arm, but I found the book. Oh. Ow. Ooh. Vision. Is there any way the Iron could accommodate hypersonic missiles in its current planned frigates and destroyers? Well, the Type 83 haven't yet been opened up, so yes, probably the Type 83s will have hypersonics. That would make sense. As for the rest, honestly, depends the size and scale of hypersonic you go for. Probably you could in the Type 26s, more likely you can in the Type 31s. And the reason I say more likely you can in the Type 31s... Ooh, I have very milk little robins. Which is probably going to confuse people, because the Type 31s are actually built with a lot more space in their design, so probably easier to adapt to hypersonics. But if you do that, you are going to lose other capabilities. Anuk. Well, the reason I've got this pain is because I've taken this shot. Would I take the shot again? Yes, I would. It was my third one. And I've had the same pain every single time. And it's worth it, because my theory is if I suffer this much pain on my right side after having the shot, then goodness knows what it'd be like to actually have the disease. Okay, the Federation had a cloaking device that allowed Enterprise D to go through an asteroid. Yes. As you see, the Federation, if they actually ever built a cloaking device, could build a lot better one than the Romulans, because their one would allow them to go out of phase, not just be blankets and disappear. The Sea Winch, an old-fashioned SCR drive switching on and off can produce an E-impulse, affects everything within 300 meters. It travels through ground. The secret is to find the connector at a correct grounding point. Yeah. Vision. Last big aiming flares were in the 19th century. Knocked out telegraph systems. They were big auroras seen after the Battle of Fredericksburg during the Civil War in Virginia, far south from Northern Lights. Yeah, basically what it seems to be is that we're looking at every 100 to 200 years, the sun seems to go through about a 10 to 20 year period of doing really big. They do small solar flares. Some of the smaller solar flares quite regularly, but really big ones seem to happen on almost a 100 to 200 year pattern. We think, and that's according to the most recent paper I've read. I'm not a physicist, I'm a historian, I just have a passion for physics and like to go read the books. So no, I think my teacher expects me to be very, very critical there, but I'll basically portray it as basically a necessity. The problem we're going to have with AI is at what point do we consider it smart enough that we have to give it rights? Because that's your problem. At what point do we consider it a equivalent human being to a human being? And that will come. I think probably more before that we'll see a level of human-computer hybridization. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be surprised at things like people having implants for communicators, i.e., to replace phones and directly link themselves to the internet. Although that's going to be a security nightmare. It's going to be fun. And look, have you received a Star Trek vessel design book yet? Nope. Still waiting for it. And Andrew Cox, good evening. Been away for a couple of weeks and just catching up the fluffy torpedo vids when this came up. Ah, the fluffy torpedo vids. They do seem to be popular. I mean, I've put a few of them out on Instagram as well for some of my friends and former students who seem to follow me more on Instagram. I do not know why, but my students seem to follow me on Instagram far more than they do on everything else, and I do barely anything on there. I say hi to them on there, but that's about it. Dasher to Rachel, hello. I do have a serious question. While we view Raw Lake as a war grave, we excavate the remains of the seamen on the Mary Rose. So when does something stop being a war grave? Ah, well, that's an interesting question. And hello, Melody640. So, we ended up having to excavate Mary Rose because there were going to be big ships going in and out of Portsmouth, and they were going to do damage to her. So it was going to destroy what archaeology was there, because it was preferable to leave these things in situ. But ships are getting bigger, the ferries were getting bigger, there were long-term plans for aircraft carriers, which they thought would get bigger. Escorts were getting bigger, everything was getting bigger, and it was doing more and more damage to the seabed. And that was exposing more and more of the Mary Rose. So they ended up recovering her and putting her in a museum in order to preserve her, because the spot where they wanted to leave her, they couldn't leave her. So it's a case of we moved the war grave, but we've kept it as intact and respectful as we possibly can. Andrew Cox had my booster 2 weeks ago and was laid out for 3 days. Doesn't surprise me. I usually get about 2 days of body ache. Nightingale, the Atlanta class were 26 free 2,150 ton frigates, while frigates now are 6,000 plus tons. Yeah. If Roma survives the Fritz X, how long does she last before the breakers? Well, it depends whether she is given to the Russians or the Italians somehow managed to keep her. They might have kept one on service, in which case she could have survived long enough to actually become a, well, to use the Drakenfell expression, which I agree with, she could have survived long enough to become grandfather's ship, in which case she could be a museum ship rather than gone to breakers. Hi, George Newman. Next one. Let's skip this question. Not comfortable. Did the UK fight to end slavery because it would also undermine other nations and prevent them from challenging the UK? Yes and no. You have to remember, once the UK has decided to end slavery itself, which is A decision which is in part moral, but in nicest way is heavily economic. It's one of those things. You'd think it should be an ethical, moral decision, but actually, when you look into it, there is a large economic dimension in that slaves don't buy things. Poor people do. And people don't tend to buy much for their slaves, whereas poor people have to buy stuff. So you create far more market for your goods if you have poor labourers than if you have slaves. It helps the wider economy. Anyway, leaving that to one side, and that rather unpalatable fact to one side, you're then left with a different scenario. In that, what do you do with other people having slaves? Because other people do have slaves. Well, Britain decides that, frankly, it's not going to let them have slaves. It's going to stop the slave trade. Now, that is partially a moral thing, nice moral standpoint, and no one ever looks bad when they're doing something which is morally good. But also, it forces other people to follow in your wake, which is going to create more markets for your goods. And it's going to create issues in terms of the supply of slaves. Because if countries are forced to rely on the internal supply of slaves they have, they're not going to have enough. And they're going to end up in trouble. And those slaves are going to get more and more value, and then they could face slave revolts. So yes, it's a good thing morally, with a rather positive international relations upside as far as the British are concerned. Very funny, privateer. Don't mind if I don't repeat that, because I don't want to have a load of Trekkies trying to kill me. Sean B, biggest problem with the buried power cables is the amount of Hughes, insane amount of cooling need, especially once you're talking about the large ones. And 1640, floppy torpedo bids. Yes. Now, normally I would just. Ooh, that hurt more than it's supposed to. I was reaching with the right and left hand side. Oh. You don't want to see the butt of the giraffe the whole time. Doggy's a giraffe. Not sure where the squirrel's gone. The videos with the fluffy torpedo, which will be coming out tomorrow night on Armchair Admirals because it's Guadalcanal campaign. Aladan him, Seamanish, there was also a strong anti-slavery movement in Parliament. Why they did away with it to begin with? Yes, but you're forgetting, why is there a strong anti-slavery movement in Parliament? Largely because the economic classes support it. And the economic classes, the industrialists, the reason they support it is moral, but also a fair number of the rich ones are also thinking with, ooh, these are people we can sell stuff to. That's the thing. The important thing to remember is that human beings are complicated creatures, and they can do things because of more than one reason. They can be both support it because they think it's morally right, and support it because they think it's economically quite right. And it helps them with other issues as well. And that's again, I don't like the sounds of people trying to become like Cybermen. It's coming. It's already here if you look in certain areas, especially when you're looking in issues of cybernetics in terms of people wanting to have prosthetics. that are connected into their nervous system to try and give them the ability to walk, to use an arm, a hand, and all these things. It's coming. A way to get around locked-in syndrome, especially people who've got damage the base of the neck and so are fine mentally but can't control their body. If you can come up with a system which can basically patch you between, that's great, and that's going to require quite a lot of computing power being built into that and quite a lot of systems to support that. It's not going to be easy. And it gave historians a chance to try and determine why the Mary Rose suddenly killed over and capsized. Yes, that was an advantage as well, but us historians would never be so base as to use, I don't know, the various fears of politicians of damaging historical, great things of great historical value to allow us to carry out research. Historians are far too high-minded for such ideas. That giraffe has a pretty short neck. Considering what my dog does to it, it's probably good at it as a short neck. He also has a zebra, which looks very similar. So win-win-win in the eyes of British. Pretty much. Hackenberg, morality and ethics are social constructs, equals imagine. There are some issues with that. I would say there are some truths and some parts of morality which are hard baked into humanity. For example, it seems to be culturally quite normal across the world. You don't kill children, you don't hurt children, and people who hurt children aren't really perceived as good people. In fact, as a rule, that's usually a very quick. Usually, most dictators, once they start to get round to actually hurting children in a way that's publicly seen, that suggests they're not going to have long. It becomes very, very distasteful to people very quickly. And there are a few other things. Like, the quote I often the thing I often do is I show people the picture of Vladimir Putin, who is not considered, by any stretch of imagination, a nice person. He's being presented with a puppy by one of the strongmen who variously, run one of the sub-countries that sort of the countries which border him. And the guy is flinging the puppy round. And Putin gets up and grabs the puppy off him. Because Putin actually likes dogs and doesn't like one. Also, please note that strongman's career was very, very quickly shortened. And in terms of his ability to actually do things. So, there you go. Putin. Not a nice guy, but ethically, hurting kids, hurting small animals, not the Putin way. And it's one of those things I put up and I go, look, we've been talking about a Russian foreign policy, how they are acting completely in their own interest and all those things, and you've used it, and you've said it's all Putin. Putin must be an inherently bad person or something like that. Fred, let's see this. There you go. Putin protects the puppy, and it basically, as a lecture, it's quite a cool lecture to give, because it gets the students all thinking one way, and then it forces them to re-examine things. And it's sort of, if I was going to give an example, I draw to an extent some inspiration, especially more recently when I've been doing it, from the episode of Community, the comedy, where Pierce Orphan, one of the characters, has died, and it's after his funeral, and they're being questioned, etc. Because the reality is, you have to understand that people are complicated. And there are some morality and ethics which are cultural constructs and depend on our own culture. And there are some things which seem to be global truths, if you want a phrase, which is a very terrible, bad phrase for it, but there honestly isn't a better one available at the moment. It's a terrible phrase for it, but it's better than all the others. Kind of like democracy. It's a terrible form of government. It's just better than all the others. Okay. That's it. Depends on damage suffered from the Fritz. That's it. 683. Why do people today not understand logistics? As people demand the abolition of the House of Lords and monarchy, but in all logistics of doing that. Look, the logistics of abolishing the House of Lords. What do you replace it with? You don't want a single You don't want a single House of Parliament. So that means you're going to have some form of elected house. What electoral system are you going to use? Want first past the post? Proportional representation? Do you want this all decided by committee or one person? Who appoints said committee if you do it? Or you're going to decide it by national referendum and have a huge debate which tears the country apart over it? I came up with a system a few years ago, which is what I thought would be the best system, which is a sort of proportional representation system combined with first past the post. In that you vote for your local MP, and this is the UK normally. You vote for the candidate you want. You get one vote. You vote for it. Right, that's all in. And you have the winners, and they go take their seats as the constituency MPs. But then you rank all the losers in terms nationally by how many votes they got. And then you assign the seats on second house proportional to the cumulative vote it got. And the people who to get those seats that they're allocated by that proportion are in order of how many votes they got in individual constituencies. So if an MP gets the most votes and wins in that area, that's great. But it also has the benefit that if you vote for the person who doesn't win, because you think they'd actually be a really good MP, and they don't win, they still might get enough votes so they go and sit in the second house. And that, to me, would be a far more sensible system. It would also undermine any attempts to ever gerrymander or rig voting districts, because you've got a significant minority. You managed to rig it so there's a minority of voters in there, or who are permanently going to be a minority of voters who won't vote for you, who vote. That's fine, but their votes will still count for that. So it means your vote automatically counts. If your person wins in your seat, yes, you've got them, but your vote counts towards the percentage of the people in the second house. If your person loses, well, it still counts towards a proportion of the second house, but also that might well give them enough votes to make them the elected member of the assembly. And my also thing was that you would have 600 members of Commons, and you'd have 400 in this assembly. So basically, you got a party would get a person in that room for every 0.25% they got. It's an idea. It was when I was doing my master's in international conflict and how you had to design a political system. I also decided that I would make the Prime Minister elected by individual national vote. So whilst they would have to draw their MPs from their ministers from the Commons and from the Assembly, so they would have to draw them from both. And to keep its sort of status as House of Lords, I actually had the idea that it would maintain 200 members of the House of Lords, but they would have to be limited to 40 former members of the armed forces, provide that. So it still provides knowledge. 40 former members of the judicial system, judicial and legal system. 40 scientists and engineers. So from that side of 40 from the arts, and 40 from the civil service. And so you'd have 2 houses of with institutional memory, one with 2/3 of its MPs, 2/3 of its representatives elected by proportional representation based off the first past the post vote for the constituency MPs. So you still only have 1 election, only have to cast 1 vote, and 1/3 institutional memory. And the thing is, people would serve their time in there, and then when you wanted after a certain point, they would keep the title, but they would no longer be serving in there, and it'd be their turn to be replaced. So you'd have 40, and you'd say, right then, we have our election every 4 years, and you can stay you each can do 5 terms. So that means every 4 years at some of the halfway point, we have to nominate these people to be the next member of the House of Lords, and they have to be voted through by the elected representatives, etc. But that was an idea. I'm sure people who are far more qualified in political science and politics will now take that idea to pieces. Andrew Cooks, the British historically do not seem to have been lacking in figuring out reasons to go and beat up nations who they thought were getting too big. No. Num's Health, what was the oldest ship to serve during World War II? Depends on your definition of serve. There are a fair number which are getting close to 40 years old, but there are a few more which could be considered older than that if you include things which are being used as accommodation ships. Mm-hmm. Ooh, people we can sell stuff to is how we end up with the British Empire. Sadly enough, yes, it's mostly true. What can be done for a ship during CMEs? Hope. Pray. There will be a lot of problems for ships. Basically, if they've got backup systems, they'll probably be okay, but they're probably going to need to reset a lot of communication stuff, especially. That's good. A friend of mine at Reading Uni studies cybernetics. Went to a lecture to see a robot human arm on the deck. His lecture appeared on the screen from California, moving the arm on the desk with the same movements of his arm. He had a chip implanted in his arm to read and transmit the movements to the robot arm. That was about 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. You see, actually, I'm not sure about cyborgs being the elite soldiers. It might be a way to improve the rank and to substitute and support the rank and file, but actually, elite soldiers, cyborgs could be problematic because an EM field, etc., could cause issues. How soon before they try to move the wreck of the SS Richard Montgomery to clear the channel, study the wreck? No one wants to move that. It's got far too much. If it's the one you're thinking of, the one in the Thames, they're giving that one a wide berth. There are entire construction projects which go, we'd like to build this here. That's within that distance to the SS Richard Montgomery. Okay, right then, we'll build it elsewhere. Anywhere else, as far away can get. Can we get to the other side of the country? That's not something anyone wants to move. Where's my mouse gone? It's somewhere around here. Yeah. Somehow I managed to turn my mouse off. Andrew Cox, if you're British, hurting some of these small fluffy animals is frowned on even more than children. Hence it's the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, but it's the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Yes, this is a common one. Karen, listening to bilge pumps got me wondering, if Belfast had been used at the Falklands with as many phalanx as could be stolen on it, what would that have been helpful for twin turrets? Potentially, but you have to remember, most of the ideas, and this is one of the interesting things we're getting into now, the ideas for twin turrets going down to single turrets was mostly based on around the idea you're going to be using the guns for air defense and a little bit of fire support. One of the interesting questions we are currently confronting in bilge pumps and looking at in our Long War series is what happens when you run out of missiles, and how quickly do you run out of missiles? And this is coming into the factor we're working on and various other various things we're working on, projects we're working on. And let's put it this way: you run out of missiles quicker than you think you're going to. And you get into a scenario where you need more, you need to have something else far quicker than you think you're going to. And whilst we'd love to say lasers are going to fill that gap, I don't know how quickly they are in reality going to fill that gap. Whereas guns are available and work now. And I think even if you have lasers, they are straight line systems, which are lovely. But for bombardment, I like being able to fire over things. Because I can't make a laser that can curve around the Earth. I know, we've tried, but we can't really. So the odds are, I think a double 5-inch, double 6-inch could be going to make an appearance in a few years' time. In fact, I'm looking at things like the Type 83 and the future destroyers, and I'm going, I wonder. Cron. To be fair, the trouble for Poland is that they're dealing with a dictator in Belarus, and honestly, he's got a beef with Europe, and he's taking out on Poland, putting them in an impossible situation. And I agree, they should probably do something about it. But the trouble is, if they do it, then he's just going to keep repeating it, and it's kind of like any international relations situation. There are people's lives at stake, and no one likes it. It looks bad for the Polish government. There's a reason it looks bad on Poland. It's looking bad on the European Union, and it's looking bad on Belashenko. But yeah. Vision. Prime Minister Jim Haddock ordered the army to save an orphan's dog trapped on an army minefield on Salisbury Plain back in the 1980s on the BBC. Yeah. The Taranto chats were just great. I'm glad they were useful. Oh wow, the dog breed that guy gave Putin was called Alabi. Bye. Yeah. So Johnson, first part space sucks. I like your system, but still hesitating about the past space portion. Could lead to a very divided house, which equals little damn. To be fair, Britain's been dealing with first past the post for a long time, and it's worked out better than not. And I'd say that's also the trouble, because a lot of people don't like first past the post, but those tend to be whichever party is currently not in power. And that's the trouble. Most of the British public seem to perceive most of the complaining about first past the post to be political. And then 1640. 1,400 tons of military-grade explosive board. They're just going to keep a nice exclusion around there in perpetuity. Yes, pretty much that's the plan. That thing going up could cause a lot of trouble for London. It could cause trouble not just for London, it could cause trouble for Teddington. And if anyone wants to look it up, Teddington Lock is where officially the Thames estuary ends. And it turns into the River Thames. I know it's called the River Thames the whole way along, but you look up Teddington Lock and you will find a very interesting place. There's also a really nice pub there as well. I know I don't drink, but they do absolutely fabulous desserts. And that may be, and it's a very nice spot to sit in the sunshine, eat some food, enjoy a nice dessert, and have a conversation about naval history. Jonathan Murray, any favourite what if designs, Dr. Clarke? Current favourite two I'm working on at the moment are, and I actually am considering a book about this. What happens Dreadnought, the 14-inch Dreadnought? What happens if the Battle of Tsushima doesn't take place and Britain doesn't have to rush construction of Dreadnought? So they can go for the 14-inch gun. They can go for probably for super firing. I think they probably still end up with double turrets, but I think you probably end up with a six turret layout rather than a 5 turret layout with 2 turrets forwards, 1 super firing over the other, 2 wing turrets and 2 aft, and that would give Fisher his dream of 8 guns firing forward, which would actually make him as happy as anything. Also, maybe give him 8 guns aft, and give him, even without the wing turrets involved, 8 guns firing either a 8-gun broadside, potentially a 10-gun broadside, if the wing turrets get involved. And I think he'd have liked that. That's what he seems to be interested in. And then, of course, there's HMS Agincourt. So I'm considering a book on the dreadnoughts that might have been prior to the end of World War One. So basically, going up to probably the G3s. But that will be the book after the sloops and possibly the carrier book. The carrier book might actually overtake the sloops, and there's a Henderson book in there somewhere as well. It all depends. It's going to sound strange. I've been doing the maths taxes recently, and I'll be open to admit this out. Basically, I've worked out that if YouTube reaches a certain level of income, I can give up one of my university teaching jobs, the one which has actually the lowest pay and the most politics, and causes the most issues, and can use that time to actually do what I need to do in terms of writing books and really get more books out. And what I can currently do is about what rate of book production is about going to be 118 months. If I did that, then I'd probably get up to one a year, maybe more. Stephen Lane, restrict backbench MPs to 2 terms and a bonus term for ministers. Politics should not be a viable lifetime career, I reckon. The reason I disagree on that one is because I do not like the idea of lame duck MPs. I don't like the idea of lame duck presidents either. I don't think you should have a system where you have maximum terms, because that means the last term they don't care about getting re-elected. So you will either have someone do everything they want in a national good, or you will have them be doing things they can do to secure themselves a good role in future and secure their future. So I would say my policy, my thinking was that if you don't win your seat 3 times in a row, you don't actually. I wasn't under my system. I did actually put in a bit of restriction. I said if you won a constituency seat, you were unrestricted. But if you didn't win, then you were restricted to 3 turns. And the elections were every 4 years. Although I did consider making them every 8, because I do sometimes wonder, I think that the every 4 years makes us very, very short term in our thinking. Frank Sparrow, Dossie, what was the relationship between the UK and US and UK after the revolution? How long did it take to eventually improve? On the surface, or actually the actual relationship? On the surface, it was frosty for many years. Actual relationship probably got decent by about... Well, let's put it this way. There's a lot of political talk about Britain interfering on the side of the Confederacy during the Civil War, but the reality is they get along pretty darn well. The Union side, Mr. Seward being an exception. I say, Cronin, how does Japan respond if the US got the 4 Lexington battlecruisers? If they got that through the treaty, the British probably get the 4 G3s. If the Americans get the 4 Lexingtons, the British get the 4 G3s. I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese want to build 4 Amagis and probably get 4 Amagis or Akagis. They're 4 top of the range battlecruiser they were building, and get rid of the Congos. 1992. Hello. Are you guys still talking about submissions for Bilge Pump's ideas? Yes, we are always taking submissions for Bilge Pump's ideas. We're slowly getting through, people. We have a plan to do a lot more recordings over the Christmas period with people. But, yeah, it's actually almost taken us a year to get around it. What could Japan have done to protect the Magi from the earthquake damage? There's nothing really you can do with a ship on a slip. That you can't do anything, really. If the hull was fine... Sorry. I have a little ladybird I have to remove. If the hull was fine and watertight, they could potentially... if the hull was fine and watertight, they could potentially float the dock and tie her in position so that she didn't come loose, but that wouldn't have been much protection, and the hull wasn't really in a state that they could do that, from memory. I like ladybirds. They don't get hurt. or squashed like other bugs do, but I keep getting a couple coming into my office, and I'm not sure where they're coming from. They must have a way in somewhere, and we'll find it. Ugh. Good lord. Ow. Also, lasers fare poorly in mist and rain. You can say that again, Carl. That's weird. Steve Winnish, I'm not sure why you've got Russia on that list. China and the US, yes, but and honestly, no, not everyone does need a multi-role destroyer. Because the British produced Type 45s, they're air destroyers. They're not making any pretenses to be a multi-role destroyer. A multi-role destroyer is lovely if that's what you want to do with it. But the British wanted an air warfare asset because their experience of the Falklands War has made the British very, very worried about air defence and really want to concentrate on that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Type 83s are general purpose and the warships in billing and capability, but probably heavily orientated around air defence. It's one of those things when you look into it and you realise the British have slightly more war loadouts of missiles than most other powers their side, so they can actually reload their ships more. I doubt anyone's going to be signing away Ukraine that quickly, Derp Squad. Seneca, how devastating was the loss of the Admiralty of the Pacific Fleet for the Southern Navy? I think all but one died in the airplane crash. It was annoying, but not really devastating. There wasn't much of a Navy there at that time. But they would really, they were training it up. Life happens, though. Nighttime Productions. Would a big solar flare incident be a good opportunity to launch an offensive, say China against Taiwan? Depends. Can be very good for you to launch an offensive as long as your systems survive. And depends on how hardened your systems are versus their systems. Doug C. So if CME hits, will it only be one side of the Earth? How long will it take to get power back up? It depends on which side of the Earth. And whilst it probably will be one side of the Earth, it'll be more likely. How do I put it? Judging from Carrington events and other things in saturation, the radiation arrived long enough that it ended up affecting more likely. Ooh. Remember, there was a stat I read. I'm not quite sure of this stat, but someone decided it was 225 degrees of the Earth were impacted. So a little over 2/3, I think that works out as. I'm not sure. Mm. 12.5 off 75. He was 62.5. So yeah, a little under 2/3, a little sort of, you know. Current concern about the original Montgomery is that due to the age of the wreck or destabilization of explosives, a storm or the vibration of a passing ship outside explosion could impact wreck. Yep. I know that one from because I know some of the people who have to go and check on it quite regularly. Hello, Michael Patton. So there were two Radetzky class designs to be unified, all big gun battery. Yeah, that would have been that's an interesting one to look at. 100 Cox, are 14-inch wing turrets viable? I always thought that you wanted the barbette holes for something that big to be on the centerline. Hello. Well, let's put it this way, Andrew. It would be interesting. It's theoretically possible. Do I think they would keep it up? No, I think they might rapidly develop the treble gun turret. But I think probably it would probably last for Dreadnought and possibly the three successors if they'd gone that way. Britain proposed the joint US-UK Monroe Doctrine right after the War of 1812. The Erie Canal was built with the bonds sold in London. Yeah, there's a pragmatic thing going on. The UK's position in the world is an insignificant strategic location. Except, correct me if I'm wrong, but the UK's location was important as it's the launch point for the invasion of Europe in late World War II. Honestly, the UK's position is pretty useful. It's next to all the major communications sea lines of communication. It's got most of the comms lines running through it. And it's fairly stable. And it's fairly large. And it's fairly secure. So yeah, it's been strategically quite a useful position. Frank Spanner, Taiwan is a lot bigger than Malta was. Well, it's quite simple, Steve. It's not having. If you have a lot more destroyers, and honestly, I was part of the group which were arguing for more destroyers. If you have 12 destroyers and you can put 3 in each carrier group, then having a multi-purpose destroyer makes sense, especially if you can have the Mark 41 VLS, which allows the general purpose. But if you're only building 6, so you'll be at less, and your priority is air defense for those roles, then air defense destroyers make sense. If that's what you need them to do. And yes, it would be good. It's one of those scenarios where if you have more, you want general purpose. But if you have less, and they have then their primary role becomes more important. Because let's be honest, the general purpose destroyer. What are the Eilberg's primary role? Probably air defense. They have strike and those capabilities put in, but the US Navy usually has more of them per carrier. The British usually have 2 Type 45s per carrier. In fact, at the moment, it's usually gone down to 1 because of issues. It makes sense for Britain at this precise time. A bigger destroyer, that's the other thing. It's on the size you're dealing with. If you've got the size of Type 45, you have limited space. Certain amount of space. You cannot increase these things. I feel like whenever I have the argument with people at aircraft carriers and they go, oh, is bigger really better? And I go, well, bigger equals bigger hangar. Bigger hangar means you can more likely deal with aircraft sizes growing, but also carry more aircraft if you need to. There have been plenty of operations which have been undermined through lack of aircraft numbers. There have been no operations I can think of which have been undermined by having too many aircraft, or too much space for the aircraft you have. So, yeah. But I was involved in those discussions. I was young at the time. But yeah, 17 years ago. 18-year-old assisting in various things and talking to people. It was complicated. It wasn't necessarily smart, what was the decisions that were made. It wasn't smart. You have to remember the first Daring came into service in 2009. So that's 12 years ago in commission. Steel was cut in 2003. Duncan had her steel cut in 2007. They were still talking about the potentiality of 2 or 3 more Type 45s being constructed as late as 2007. So we're talking 14 years ago. I think, and I made the case that you bought 9 ships and you fitted them with the Mark 41 VLS with 16 to 24 cells, depending on how you do the math of the assumption. Most people think they can take 16. Looking at the math and looking at it, I would say they could probably have taken a little bit more, but yeah. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. And the decision was made, and there is a logic to the decision. It's one of those things. It's, how do I put this politely? Sometimes in the world of defense and strategy, there are no right answers. There are good answers, there are bad answers, but there are no right or wrong answers. And with the Type 45s, it's a case of if they were bigger and more numerous, you would want general purpose. But you have the size of destroyer you have the number you have, and you have the primary role is air defense. So they're air defense, which makes sense them being air defense destroyers. That's their primary role, and that's what they're needed for, because you don't have the numbers to go chasing the other duties. And that's the other problem, because if you actually do have them being general purpose, and you have those smaller numbers, then they get carved off to go and do other missions, and you don't have them there doing what you want. Which can be a factor, which the Royal Navy is not above thinking about. I doubt the solar flare would knock out a World War II Jeep in the anti-armor tractions. Quick for 7. I was amazed at what the Royal Navy achieved in the Battle of Taranto on a shoestring and at night. Would destroying the Reggio Marina at that time have knocked Italy out of the war? If they'd managed to achieve a bigger hit, i.e. if HMS Eagle had come along and they'd gone for the maximum, if they had damaged the Reggio Marina enough, which they would have, on paper you certainly can presume they would have done, it would have stopped and definitely pushed Italian operations back a long way, and might well have led to the Allies winning in North Africa earlier on, because things were already going their way at that point anyway. And with the Regia Marina sufficiently knocked out, that could well stop the convoys coming across and allow the British to intercede there, which would mean, well, if you have North Africa under Allied control and you have the Regia Marina being pushed back, then the odds are, well, the odds are you have a lot less problems with Italy in the war. Concurrent. Lasers versus mouse drivers, Cyber versus normal Marines, and someone's been reading the Ark Royal books. I have read those, yes. So anyway, aren't you in the window breaking radius of the Richard Montgomery? Roughly, I'm fairly sure where we are is for me and Drac. Nice long discussions going on here, which they're nicely things about Liverpool and cars. Well, I'm skipping through those. I'll get to a book in a second, I think. Especially as I've got one out. Diminish. If you are only building 6, then means you can only count on 2 inserts at a time. So having multi-role is even more important, especially in modern asymmetric conflicts. You see, that's a lovely thing, but as I explained earlier, sadly enough, that's wrong. Because if you need 2 for air defense of your fleet and then multi-role, then usually some politician somewhere is going to say, well, you can go off and do this. You've still got a destroyer there for air defense, and then you're down to 1 for your carrier battle group. Whereas if your 2 destroyers are air defense only, you can turn around to the politician and go, sorry, they're air defense destroyers. They're part of the carrier battle group. We'll do it a different way. So you're talking about something which is nice in theory, but in practice is the wrong answer. Because again, it's the nice on theory, you are right. In practice, you are wrong. Because in theory, the politicians don't then start trying to muck around and make promises, and you don't have to deal with competing requirements of things away from your carrier battle group. You can form your nice strike group and you have your 2 general purpose destroyers, and that's fine. But the reality is different. As, again, Britain learnt in the Falklands War again, and they'd learnt in World War II. And as for ground attack, well, that's why we have F-35s on a carrier. Alright, I'm waiting for news of a job offer. Please give me a book review for a distraction. Yeah, go on. We'll get in some books. Right then. Let me just put in some timestamps. Bruships 60. COVID jab. Mm-hmm. 2, 30. Hang on, no. Let's do this. 20. 40. Part 3. 01. 4. 01. 20. Let's go. So, I think a lot of you are going to like this book, and I'm not sure if I've shown it to you before, but I wanted to talk it over this week, so if I have, I apologise. And I'll just catch up the questions. No, it sounds like the prelude to, oh, we lost one of our 2 CVs. Her normal escorts were reduced because we sent them off to do X, Y, Z. Pretty much, which is why Steve is right in the theory. In the theory, it's better to have the general purpose destroyers. And I've written a whole book about why general purpose destroyers are the thing you should have. That's the whole Tribal Battle and Daring's book. The form is basically making the case for general purpose capable destroyers. But the point is, you need them in numbers. You need them viable. And you need them available. If you have 3 destroyers for a carrier, and you need at least 2 as anti-air escorts, then you can send one off. But if you only have 6, then you can't afford to send one off because you only have 2. So one off leaves 1 and 1 is none. So your reality becomes having them as anti-air warfare destroyers means they can't be sent off. They're not going to be sent off for something else. Kirk Douglas on the Midway film every single time. Always Kirk Douglas. Hmm. 290. Hello. Do you agree that the Regia Marine are largely successful in protecting the North African convoys? And if so, do you think they can be judged as a successful navy? Largely successful. They did quite a good job. They had a lot of problems. The RN caused them a lot of. Let's put it this way. The Mediterranean War was a convoy battle war, and both sides had successes and failures. And if you judge the RN as successful, you have to judge the Regia Marina as successful. So I think both fought a successful war in that thing, and they kept people going. But the trouble is, you could never. The RN was far more capable of stopping the Regia Marina getting across, and the Regia Marina were able to stop the RN just bringing the convoys around Africa. It took longer, but they were just doing that. It was the RN job was to resupply Malta, not resupply North Africa with them. Right. But guy 16, how would the Bismarck fare if the RN had US carrier aircraft at the time? We did have some US carrier aircraft as well as RN one, and probably much the same. She gets hit. I think by a swordfish or an albacore. I can't remember which. I'm fairly sure there's a mixed strike of albacores and swordfish sent at her at various points. Dewinish, I think you're having a bit of you're having an argument with me when I'm not about a different thing than I'm actually arguing. because you're saying the thing about multi-role is it can operate independently from the fleet and still provide capability. I'm not disagreeing with you. The thing about it, though, is if you only have two and one off goes on independent operations, you now only have one to protect your carrier battle group, and that isn't enough. So having two, which they can't go off and operate independently because they're not general purpose, makes sense from that perspective. And if your F-35s aren't in the ocean, in that ocean at that time, then your Type 45s probably won't be. I have just finished watching the TV series about life of Mussolini. Taranto was not even mentioned. Is this reflective of his view of the importance of the matter? No, it's reflective of the people actually writing the script. Definitely. I think it would be fairer to say that Britain is at risk of having the international relevance of a small archipelago off the northwest coast of a population of 60 million. Probably going to shoot a bit above that, but we'll see. Counter-8, hello. I read the USN is considering using some Tychos as static sound batteries, as recommended in Build Trumpet 69. Have you considered doing some Build Trumps as vodcasts? We are doing some. We do some videos. We do our specials. We're currently doing one on Full Z. We did some on Taranto. You can find the Build Trumps Taranto videos on my channel. So why would the SAS be being sent in there? And there's a coup in where, and you're basically saying a nice sort of mission. Yes, justify this, but yeah, so what? Then we can't do it. That's a problem, but it's also not a problem. Britain is not the world's policeman. We used to be. We're not now. That's America's job. And if we're going in without American support, then we're probably having to send a carrier group. Because that's how we're designed to operate. You might not like it, but it's the way it's organized. As I said, multi-role is a liability in certain circumstances. And the circumstances when you have less ships and you need to guarantee air defense of your group. Again, one of the interesting paper is what we're currently working on for the Type 83s with me and Drat, which will be multi-role, but the thing is they're big enough that you only actually need one of them to provide the air defense power that can cover a carrier battle group. And that's the thing. If you max out a Type 45, they have 72 cells plus 8 harpoon systems, so 80 cells. If you max them out with Mark 41s, which is lovely, but that's not really enough for air defense of the fleet on its own. Who cares about BP getting angry? There are other people who can go to BP's aids. Hello, building the wooden fighting ship. James Dodds and James Moore. It's a good book, this one. It's got pretty much everything in it you can possibly imagine. And it's rather cool in that it's got all the smithing, all the staff, and I think I have covered this before, actually. But I just wanted to get into this one again, because it has things like this chapter on the dockyard. In selecting a vessel to represent the wooden fighting ship, we naturally turned to the records of the British Admiralty, where we were able to draw from first-class archive material carefully preserved since the 18th century. Thus, it was there that we settled upon Thundra, a vessel built in what was perhaps the most famous of the Royal Dockyards, Woolwich, a microcosm of the larger yards. It would be wrong to claim that the Royal Dockyards were exemplary institutions in the way in which they were organised and run. High productivity was not one of their virtues. In the middle of the 18th century, time taken to build substantial vessels was affected by the shortage of large pieces of high-quality oak, but it's hard to explain a 10-year building programme for the Royal George at Woolwich, or even a 4-year programme for Fundra. It should have been possible to build a 74 in half that time. By this fact alone, no records give reasons that can account for delays. The Navy Board was riddled with dishonesty, and there was probably a fair degree of slackness in the yards, which must in part have contributed to the long building programme. Also, building was often interrupted by the ever-increasing number of ships requiring repair. Private yards were probably more efficiently run out of necessity in order to remain in business. However, such was the reputation of English shipyards in the 8th century that shipwrights came from all over Europe to improve their skills and learn about the organisation of the operation. Frederick Ap Chapman, an astute businessman who is widely regarded as the father of science and naval architecture, worked in yards on London's river as a shipwright from 1741 to 43. Chapman later established his own yard in Sweden and built up the Swedish Royal Dockyard at Karlskrona into a model of its kind. The main countries involved in ship construction on any scale this time were Sweden, Holland, France, Spain, and England. It's thanks to Samuel Pepys in the 17th century and to the increasing awareness of the need for rationalisation in the 18th century that records of all the kinds of activities were so carefully maintained, in particular those involving expenditure. There were detailed job specifications prepared for yard officers, records of purchase of timber and stores, payrolls listing everyone from senior yard officials down to the rat catcher, voluminous correspondence between the yards and Navy Board, and careful minutes of Navy Board meetings. Although these are not as full as one would like, recording only conclusions rather than discussions. In addition, there are logs of captains, officers, and masters, and detailed reports from yards and naval stations overseas. Although this adds up to a formidable amount, altogether this adds up to a formidable amount of documentation. There are one or two serious gaps, however. Some activities were not considered worth recording, and certain documents, such as the yard's daily reports, did not survive the clear out of the record office that took place at the beginning of the century. Nevertheless, enough material remains for us, drawing also on several excellent handbooks on shipbuilding in the grace of the 18th century, to form a good idea of how shipbuilding was conducted in the Royal Dockyards. An available account of the general state of the Royal Dockyards and the Navy in 1774 is contained in a report prepared for George III, recorded in a beautiful leather-bound volume known as the King's Book. The principal and largest yard was Portsmouth, the main advantage being the spacious roadstead, the largest in England, or for that matter in the known world at the time. The report refers to the easy entrance for capital ships, and while the dockyard, being situated on an island in the harbour, was easy to defend and was in fact heavily fortified. With the developments in naval warfare in the second half of the 18th century, indeed, even to the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Portsmouth was ideally situated to serve the fleet operating in the Channel and the Bay of Biscay. There was also a huge naval arsenal at Portsmouth, employing twice as many men as Woolwich and providing all manner of services and repairs. Plymouth was only established as a Royal Dockyard in 1689, but grew to be the third largest in the kingdom. Clearly the best port in the United Kingdom for squadrons cruising the western approaches, an aspect of naval activity that increased rapidly in importance with the expansion in the North American colonies. Plymouth is criticised in the report of 1774 only in respect to the narrow, crooked passage into the harbour, although it was not as disadvantageously sited as Chatham. Chatham was the kingdom's second dockyard, and until the onset of the French wars brought Portsmouth to the fore, the main naval arsenal. It was founded during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I and remained of considerable importance despite the ravages inflicted by the Dutch during the reign of Charles II, provided a safe, sheltered anchorage, especially after Sheerness was fortified on the orders of Charles II to guard the mouth of the Medway during the Dutch wars. A natural protection to the approaches to Chatham was the navigational hazards of the Thames estuary, although they held no fears for the Dutch, who had traded these waters for centuries. The Medway is a tricky river to negotiate, and the large 18th century square riggers found its 15 miles of twisting channel difficult to navigate. For ships of the line, third rates and above, there were only 6 points of the compass on a favourable wind to sail down river to the Thames estuary. Sailing upriver was a little easier, with 10 points of the compass on a favourable wind. Even then, there were only a few days per month during the spring tides when the water in parts of the channel were deep enough for the larger vessels. Tucked away in the correspondence in the middle of the 18th century is a plaintive note from the resident commissioner at Chatham to a Navy officer in London, asking permission to work on Sunday so that Captain, a third rate, and another similar sized vessel be brought in and docked, thus enabling the yards to take advantage of the spring tides and save a whole month. Chatham continued in importance, despite the whole more advantageous position of Channel ports. Sheerness remained subordinate to Chatham, but helped relieve the problems posed by navigational difficulties on the Medway. It's a really cool book. We're doing questions and books. A little bit of questions, a little bit of books. No, so stuff that's plugged into the grid, stuff like vehicles or say laptop that's not plugged in, wouldn't be at risk due to the antenna type required to receive such a signal. Think long telegraph lines run as like carrying events or nuts. Yeah. I take everyone. How revolutionary would a fuel as that as much as power as a nuclear reactor? No harmful radiation that can render nuclear and fossil fuels obsolete. But how long does that take to go into get in use? You found such a magical thing, and that was such a wonderful thing. Probably be got into use as quickly as it possibly could. It depends on the infrastructure and how easy it is to actually use. Mm. And that's everyone. Everyone would like to live in that sort of scenario, but in a world where we'd all like to live in a world where poverty, global warming, and energy crisis were things of the past. It actually happening, we'll see. But guys, do you see any nuclear-powered non-carrier warships built in the future? Honestly, the more and more I look into the Rolls-Royce small nuclear reactors, the more and more I think it might actually come about. Because small reactors are of interesting viability. Right, I'll be back in a second. I'm just going to stick up a slideshow. While I come back, because someone just knocked on the door, and I think it's someone coming to check I'm okay. Hello, I'm coming. Ow. Yes, I'm coming. I'm okay. Oh. Yes, I know. Thank you. Oh. Ow. Just a second. Ow. Lady? Mm-hmm. So, Garen, the mention of books mainly looking at my bookcase and realised my copy of World War II James sitting next to my childhood copy of Rupert the Bear. What book have you had the longest? Probably one of my Thomas the Tank Engine books. Because I tend to get those out for my little cousins. That's it, I can see small modular nuclear reactors being used on aircraft carriers. I can see them being used on lots of things. Right, so, next book. Constantius III, Rome's Lost Hope, by Ian Hughes. For those who don't know, Constantius is basically the young emperor. Came to fore in or around 410 when he was appointed as Magister Militarum, or Master of Troops, to the Honorius, the young emperor of Western Roman Empire. His predecessor, Stilicho, had been murdered by his own troops, and much of Gaul and Hispania had been overrun by barbarians or usurpers. One by one, Constantinus eliminated the usurpers and defeated or came to terms with the various invading groups. Most notoriously, he allowed the Visigoths to settle in Gaul in return for their help in defeating the Vandals and the Alans, who had seized part of Hispania. Constantius married his Honorius' sister and was eventually proclaimed his co-emperor. However, the Eastern Roman Emperor, Honorius' nephew, refused to accept his appointment, and Constantius was preparing a military expedition to enforce the recognition when he died suddenly, having been emperor for just 7 months. He's one of those interesting people in that almost realpolitik should be named for him rather than perhaps Bismarck, because it's what he practices. Third siege in the Second Rome. Whether a battle was fought or not, Alaric would by now have known that Honorius had come to terms with Constantine. In addition, thanks to the Eastern reinforcements, it was clear that Honorius was definitely safe in Ravenna, and Alaric may even have believed, or been led to believe, the possibility of Honorius spreading false information should not be discounted, that further reinforcements were coming from the east. In these circumstances, Alaric was now certain that Attalus had little hope of becoming sole emperor, and definitely would not be accepted as a joint ruler by Honorius. Returning to Rome, Alaric again proposed that a combined force of Romans and Goths be sent to Africa in order to secure control of the grain supply. Again, Attalus and the Senate refused to comply with the request. Alaric was doubtless frustrated by the opposition to his plans. On the other hand, obviously the overthrow of the Albuquinus was probably a sign of yet another change in policy. Moreover, the new regime was probably headed by Constantinus, who earlier may have been one of Stilicho's main supporters. Therefore, it seemed that a new agreement with Ravenna was again a possibility. At the same time, it would appear that despite being given a senior post by Attalus, Heuvel had begun to undermine Attalus, attempting to detach Alaric from supporting his appointed Augustus. It may even be now that Valens, appointed as Magister Equitum by Attalus, was executed for treachery. The sources do not give any indication of the form of this treachery, but it's possible that the charge was invented by Joas in his attempts to secure his own position. Although he defected to Attalus, Attalus had no senior position to offer. The posts of Magister Peditum and Magister Equitum were held by Alaric and Valens. Jovius may have wanted to eliminate Valens in order to take his place. It would appear that Jovius was also involved in Alaric's next decision. In summer 410, Alaric deposed Attalus in the hope that the concession would encourage further negotiations with Ravenna. This decision appears to have worked. It's an interesting period of history. Not sure why the people viewing dived and then rose back in. I do sometimes find it interesting. How it does that? It's down back. It's I'm not sure what YouTube does sometimes, but it does some interesting things. It really does. And now it's lost the studio. Ba-da-da-da-da. Ba-da-da-dee-dee. Yeah, this makes more sense. Now it's working. Hey, that's good. Oh, I love YouTube. I love YouTube. Just keep reminding myself of that. Cameron, could we see a modular reactor being built into a fueling ship and used to crack water and stored hydrogen used to fuel small ships, just giving less of a disposal issue? I could see it being put onto a carrier or something like that for such a role. Material. So HMS Swifter will be the first UK SSN to be scrapped, then HMS Resolution, then the rest, unless HMS Dreadnought, the SSN can be saved. We can always hope. But the new Dreadnought is to be an SSBN. Yes, Natalie 640. But there's an old Dreadnought, which is an SSN. Dr. Frank Sweater, let's see, what kind of navy do you classify the French as when they don't have their carrier working? Well, they're still a medium power. It's just they go up and down the medium power scale a lot, depending on what ships are available. Doxy, how well does a detachable hull design sound for warships? Thinking of Star Trek, but on oceans. I wouldn't want to try it. Don't take this the wrong way, but there are some things more hostile than space, and one of those things is salt water. Detachable ships means you have to control through things, and yeah. Not sure how good it would be. And let's see. This book, the Trafalgar Chronicles, which is an interesting one, which I have to take around here for you to see. It's a series of naval history essays on the Nelsonic era. And considering earlier discussions, and it's officially the Journal of the 1805 Club, it's got articles in here on the Governor King of New South Wales and his Maori guests by Tom Fremantle. Reluctant Partisans, The Slaves of Princess Anne County in the War of 1812 by Christopher Pazetsky. The Tailor Prince by Lily Stahl. And Captain Nathaniel Portlock by Gerald Holland, which is actually the one I would go to. I've read them all. They're good articles, but Portlock is pretty cool. Should I do him on next one? I'm going to do The Watery Maze, which is with Wolfe and Saunders at Quebec, 1759, by Barry Goff. Shall I? Many are the interventions of naval force and amphibious capability in the history of North America, and particularly Canada. A few examples will suffice. The English Kirke brothers took Quebec in 1529 and held it for 3 years. Sir William Phipps in 1690 commanded a New England expedition and failed to take Quebec for a number of reasons, not least the storm that wreaked disaster on the fleet. In 1711, Admiral Sir Hovenden Walker's fleet came to grief on the rocky isles known as the Ile aux Ours in the St. Lawrence River. Then again in 1746, the French fleet suffered from the scurvy, lapse of leadership, and many gales, and in consequence could not take Annapolis River Royal nor consider other military objectives. And to cite one last example, a British squadron suffered heavily from the hurricane off Cape Breton in 1757, destroying any hope of an early capture of Louisbourg. The retention of New France, Acadia, and Canada favoured the French throughout this period. Holding these locations would prevent the British from getting control of the continental interior, with its immense lands and resources. Further, retention would keep the restless, expansion-minded 13 colonies in check. Vergennes, the French ambassador at Constantinople, who possessed greater insight into Britain's new problems if France would be obliged to relinquish Canada, put it this way: the consequences of the entire secession of Canada are obvious. I'm persuaded England will ere long repent of having removed the only check that keep her colonies in awe. It was the security of the northern frontier and the eviction of the French power that the British ministry urgently wanted, so it proved. But as of the end of the War of the Austrian Succession, it became clear to many, not least Admiral Peter Warren at Boston in recounting circumstances to the Board of Admiralty in London, it seems now to be a struggle between the French and us, who should be masters of the continent. Gales began to tip in Britain's favour and to France's disadvantage with the founding of Halifax in 1749 as an anchor of empire. A means for imperial defence, but also a means of forced projection, both coastwise and into the interior. Ships, not fortresses, would control the destiny of the New World. Britain, with its surging maritime capacity, was well placed to secure that supremacy in Canada. The decisive event in the 7 Years' War came at Quebec in 1759, was due in no small measure to Vice Admiral Sir Charles Saunders, naval hero of the British victory. However, his contributions will always stand in the shade of Major General James Wolfe. There are many reasons for this imbalance to state, not least the fact that the victor in the land campaign died on the field of battle, as did his opponent commander, and was immortalised in story and in art. As the Canadian historian Michael Burnett once commented, a little derisively, about the rebel leader Louis-Joseph Papineau, who fled to the United States to escape authorities in 1837, a true hero ought not to die in bed, but on the field of conflict. But Wolfe was a brilliant military commander, justly acclaimed as perhaps the greatest practitioner of combined warfare since Drake, down to the 20th century, and perhaps after. Had Wolfe not fought at Quebec, his name would still stand high in the annals of British military history and amphibious operations. Probably. It's a really cool read, and it is a good book. I don't know. Very interesting conversation in the chat going on grid dynamics. As in power grid dynamics, and whether to go decentralized or centralized. The interesting thing is most power grids are decentralized. by their very nature, they have multiple power stations, and that's the whole point of building as a national grid. It makes it by its very nature decentralized. You have multiple power stations that can all provide the power. However, and this is always an issue, the trouble is, the more power stations you have, the more you have to secure and protect. And a lot of things work great on theory, but it's kind of like, at the moment, the RN has 2 carriers, and on paper that means they always will have a carrier available. On paper. But we all know accidents happen, unforeseen events happen. So it's kind of like that when you're talking about nuclear power. You have it mainly as a backup to the other power systems to provide a constant load into the system, just in case life happens. Hopefully we move past it. Hopefully. But for the moment, it's quite good what we've got. It's a quite balanced system. And honestly, solar power and all these things, if you've got a global power grid, solar power becomes far more viable. Because yes, whilst there's one side which is not in the sun, the other side is in the sun. And that balances it. It's the same. It's one of those things. The thing I'm looking for, and I was looking at the COP26 I'm most interested by, was various countries pledging money to setting up a global integrated power grid. And if you can really set up a global power grid that connects every country into one giant power network, that's potentially very interesting. It's also potentially quite problematic. But it also means that you could potentially get around some of the issues and demands which are being placed on fossil fuel, etc. Because if you've got a global power grid, then the money to invest in the quite expensive infrastructure needed to implement a solar grid or power or wind turbine network in a country which doesn't have those things in place. We often use the cost and go, yes, it costs this much to implement it. It does in countries which already have quite a large infrastructure of qualified engineers and all the various systems needed to support them. It's quite relatively cheap. In a country which has got nothing to start off with and you're having to set it all up from the scratch, it becomes more expensive quite rapidly. But the thing is, if you have a global power network, and so you can sell power from one country into another country, well, then suddenly your investment cost becomes, well, I can run my power, I can build this power station and run it at full capacity at all times, earning maximum money and maximum profit from it, solar power, etc. And there's always going to be a maximum demand for it because it's supplying the whole world. John Cameron, the theory is that when the Americans invaded, the French Canadians turned to the British army to defend them from the religious persecution by the invading army. Let's be honest. These things happen. It's the joy of history. Tobias Jeffrey, hello. In your perspective as an naval historian, will we see a transition to all-electric ships based on the transition from sail to steam or nuclear and the like? Any thoughts? Well, I think a nice all-electric ship is certainly an interesting idea. I myself suspect it's probably going to be more likely a hydrogen cell ships, especially for warships. And that certainly seems to be what various nations are looking at. And so that becomes then a case of, are there going to be ships which require fueling or charging? Or a mixture of both? How are they going to work? It'll be interesting to see. It will be really interesting to see. And I don't think, though, it's necessarily going to be as quick as we'd like to imagine it's going to be. I don't think the Royal Navy's Type 83s or Type 32s are going to be that way inclined, and I don't see the next American destroyers as being that way inclined. Can you please tell me what solar panels are made of? Oof. That's really beyond my skill set, so I'm not jumping into that one. What about some research? It depends on the type of solar panel. I have a PhD student who I've been advising recently and working with recently, who's doing a lot of stuff on renewable power generation and how green they really are in terms of material sourcing for them. And solar panels are complicated because they are some of the most efficient designs in terms of power generation, are probably some of the least green in terms of their manufacture. But they then have a high offset and a long life. It's one of those things. You have to look at all these things and go, how are we going to do it? And I actually think it's kind of interesting, the new carbon capture regulation, because I'm not really sure I agree with that as an idea, but the plan is to go for carbon capture. And the thing is, that's really useful when you consider it starts to green the costs and the production realities of making solar panels and wind turbines, both which can produce various interesting fumes. Let's see, what role does the UK have on ISS and space in general? It has actually quite a lot of. It's one of those things, for one of the countries which really doesn't get the headlines on space, Britain has quite a lot of impact in space, especially in terms of satellites and rovers and various equipments being built up there. We don't have our own space program, so to speak. We are technically part of the European space program. That's how we sent Tim Peake up there. And we do a lot of work with NASA. But Sorry Satellite Technologies is a very cool company. And I've done a bit of work with them over the years. And they are involved in a lot more than you necessarily think about. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the spaceports we're setting up. Hmm. The all-nuclear navy. Oh, yeah, don't let's go start on the all-nuclear navy. That was always going to be a no-starter because an all-nuclear navy is a very expensive idea for ships which are inherently potentially going to get blown up. It's just not sensible. It's not sensible at all. That's good. I think it'll be interesting to compare environmental impact of construction renewables against those of non-renewables. And that's what this PhD student's doing. Dan Freeman, to somewhat move the conversation away from energy arguments, which would be great for me because that's not my area of expertise. I'm a naval historian. I do study this quite a lot, but you know. What is the role of LiDAR in naval warfare? LiDAR. Well, light detection and ranging is a sort of... how do I put this? LiDAR is using a system to map the world around you. Now, the thing about LiDAR systems is that especially if you are a navy operating close inshore, they're absolutely critical. For example, if the Royal Navy had had LiDAR systems on their frigates and perhaps Fearless and Intrepid in the Falklands War, you would have probably cut down the number of losses by a tremendous amount because you'd have probably you'd have had to be able to work and map the different trains, and you wouldn't have been as affected by the train because the very nature of LiDAR, especially once you overload it over your radar connections, is it tells you what returns are the train, what returns are not the train. If you can overlay the two together. So it's amphibious warfare, it's inshore warfare. Interesting enough, at sea. Well, that's a bit of more of a problematic system because you're not going to really do much about the seabed. It can manage to work it out down to a certain level, but not really below that. The bathymetric system is more successful. But it tells you it's more successful again in shallower water than it is in deep water, which is why it's not revolutionizing the world and making us all not afraid of submarines anymore. Topographic, as said, that is incredibly useful for things like giving us an overlay and giving us an accurate idea of where things are for radars for close inshore work. So that's its main things where LiDAR comes in. Rick Vasava, yep, the Chinese fleet is probably as large and most likely as harmful as what you've been seeing on YouTube. I'm not sure about 15,000 plus strong, but looking at some of the things that have come in the background, they seem to be doing a lot of damage in their wake. And China's the demand for fish is colossal. It's an important part of their diet, and it's an important part of their economic survival and food supplies. Okay, do something. Read years ago that the Toyota Prius, when the Toyota Prius came out, the Hummer H2 was actually more environmentally friendly when you looked at the whole life of the vehicle from manufacturing disposal. The original Prius battery was a bit of a nightmare to dispose of. So you could be potentially correct, but I wouldn't like to say. That sounds like one of those things which could be a mean a marketing statement, but could be also it's crazy enough to be true. That's good. Can't vouch for accuracy, but I once heard that CO2 output for concrete production for a nuclear reactor was similar to a coal power plant running for a year. Well, it depends again what type of concrete you're using. That's going to sound really quite strange, but let me explain it. There is such a thing as green concrete, or more environmentally friendly concrete. I happen to have a friend, another PhD student, when she finishes it, she's going to finish her PhD. PhD is in various structures of concrete. Anyway, so she's actually working for a company now on green concrete, and she's going great guns. And preformed concrete produced off-site is probably about as environmentally friendly as you can get. And it's getting better as it is at the moment, and it's getting better all the time. Because concrete is... how do I put this? One of the things is if you can reduce the carbon footprint of concrete, that's great. But it's a through life cost. And that is something you have to think about, the through life cost. And you build something with decent concrete, which has as low a carbon impact as you can possibly put into it, and it can last a long, long time. A long, long time. And that's useful. Now, for instance, you've been in shallow waters for mine warfare. The trouble is, really, the bathymetric system is not, as I understand it, is not really accurate enough for mine warfare. But essentially, congratulations, old Richard. 6 months membership. Thank you. LiDAR becomes more effective the more processing power you can dedicate to it for signal cleanup. True. So again, it's one of those things which you should link with AI. That's good. Do airborne particles, say smoke generator, cause problems with accurate LiDAR? Not usually, because LiDAR isn't massively long range. And because, especially if you've linked it to enough processing power, and it's taking thousands of measurements a second, it tends to average out and manage to work them out. I think that's what thousands of measurements per second is a scale. I think so. John Barrett, I don't know if you've heard about the possible movie of Operation Mincemeat that's meant to be released next year. Yes, I have heard about it, and as I understand it, me and Drakenfell have a date with a cinema. If you're very, very lucky and they don't mind it, we might even live tweet our reaction to it. And if we're allowed in cinemas at that point, in terms of COVID being low enough. That's good. You are right about... how do I put this? You've said your understanding is the concrete needed for nuclear reactors needs various qualities for which the production process puts a lot of carbon gas into the atmosphere. That's certainly the previous generation of nuclear reactors and the way concrete was done with that. But the trouble is, when we're talking about the modern power plants and the modern reactors and the modern power stations and what we can do, the development of concrete has accelerated almost as fast as batteries in some respects. The concrete you're looking at now is very much not the concrete of 10 years ago, is not the concrete of 20 years ago. When you're talking about the concrete level, you're talking for that sort of industrial level. Cameron, the environmental impact of concrete compared to building materials depend on the lifetime of the building. The Colosseum is very green. The use to hold up wooden fence posts, not so much. Honestly, I use quite a bit of it to hold up wooden fence posts. So yeah, I have to hold my hand up to that one. But that's because the wooden ones kept getting bashed down by people. Now we've got concrete ones. Sometimes you're fine and sometimes you're not. Ow. I'm going to that side. I've had. Right. So, next book. And this is a cool one. So, next book. Years of Endurance, The Life Aboard Battlecruiser Tiger, 1914 to 1916. And this is a lovely little book, and actually I highly recommend this as a Christmas present. It's got some cool photos. For anyone who likes HMS Tiger, you're going to enjoy this. For anyone who wants to learn more about World War I, you're going to enjoy this. For anyone who likes the personal story of war, you're going to enjoy this book. It's got good pictures in it. It's got good history in it. And it is all about Tiger. And let's see. Let's go to our ship. That chapter is my favourite, this one. The Medical Director General had completed his inspection of the temporary hospital, which I'd been ordered to organise during the first 2 weeks of the war. He was not a man given to words of approval, but the absence of fierce criticism was just as significant of satisfaction. And with some trepidation, I told him I had a request to make. What is it? I want to be sent to sea, sir. Some medical officers would be thankful for a safe shore billet like this. I made no answer. It was no concern of mine what the aspirations of other men might be. He considered for a little. When can you turn over? I should want 24 hours to muster stores, sir. You will have the best ship I can give you. Nothing more was said. 2 days afterwards, I was told that my relief had been appointed, and that when the muster of stores was completed, I was to proceed to Clydebank to take medical charge of a newly completed battlecruiser. She had a skeleton crew on board and would be regularly commissioned with a full crew 3 or 4 days after my arrival. The exact date was, of course, a secret, so I was not altogether surprised to be told by my chief sick berth steward in the hospital that it was to be on the 3rd of October. Let's be honest, if your chief steward doesn't know, you're in trouble. My relief duly turned up, inspected me the hospital wards with their 180 patients, the rows of St. John's ambulance men who had been called up for the war, the temporary nursing sisters, the domestic staff who had been taken over with the establishment, which had previously been used as a sailor's home, and the sprinkling of naval ratings who formed the backbone of the whole. He expressed himself as satisfied, and the next evening found me on in the train for Glasgow. Whilst passing through London, it was my duty to call on the Director General, and I did so. On entering his room, it was impossible to assume I was welcome, but at least he didn't throw me out. What do you want? To thank you for my appointment, sir, and to report myself in accordance with instructions. Grrr. Conversation seemed difficult. His little piercing blue eyes behind bushy grey eyebrows glared threatening at me. I'm very old for my seniority, sir. I was late in joining the service. What do you want? He snapped. Only this, sir. If we should be in action in this ship, I might get specially promoted. Otherwise, I shall have to retire for age. Plenty better men have done so. I had shut my bolt and got up, but he motioned me to sit down again. I promise you that if you do well, your special circumstances will be considered. Early next morning, on arrival in Glasgow, I went to the station hotel and booked a room. Stupidly enough, I left my pocketbook with a lot of money in it on the dressing table while I went to have a bath. It was gone on my return, and the affair was at once reported to a black-clad lady who sat in the office. She was not all pressed. Did you look everywhere for the money? Yes, I told you. The money was in my pocketbook on the dressing table when I went to my bath, and the book and money have gone on my return. Did you lock the door of your room? Yes, and I opened it with my key when I came back. Well, all I can tell you is that a commercial gentleman in that room made the same complaint last week, and when we searched the room, the money was found at the back of a picture where he put it when he was drunk. Go back and look again. And that was all I ever heard about my lost pocketbook. Luckily, I had enough loose change to pay my bill, and my railway pass took me down to Clydebank Station with my luggage. There seemed to be an awful lot of the latter, although, in accordance with Admiralty orders, all the gangways or gagawls of naval life had been eliminated, and the services of a porter were necessary to take the gear to the ship. No porter was to be found, as the usual man had been called up. After considerable searching, a friendly Scot with a barrow intimated his willingness to assist. We got the gear on board, stowed it for the time being in a flat outside my cabin, and then I handed my friend 2 half-crowns. He looked at them in his palm for a bit, transferred his attention to me, eyed the coins again, and ejaculated, "Losh me," and made off the companion ladder as fast as he could travel. Later today, while standing at the gate of the dockyard, he came up to me, showing every evidence of having tested the purchasing power of his gratuity. Man, that was a fine tip you gave me this morning. Come on down the road a bit, and I'll stand you a drink. It was explained that the offer was a tempting one, but that my being in uniform made these things very difficult. Oi, I ken. They Navy people are gay-ad for new folk. Nae liberty ever. The apostle of liberty lurched off down the street, doubtlessly congratulating himself that he had been able to do the right thing at so little expense. The enormous grey mass of the largest, fastest, and most powerful battle cruiser in the world lay alongside the fitting-out jetty in John Brown's dockyard. From the brow amidships which connected her with the shore, her bows stretched in the distance apparently into the middle of the yard, whilst aft her stern was well into the waters of the muddy Clyde. Speed and beauty were welded into every line of her. Here indeed was a ship. The highest ideals of grace and power had taken form at the bidding of the artist brain of her designer. Wherever she went, she satisfied the eye of the sailorman, and I have known them to pull miles just at the sweetness of her lines may delight their eyes. She was the last warship built to satisfy the sailor's ideas of what a ship should be like, and nobly she fulfilled that ideal. Besides any others, she made them look like floating factories. No man who ever served in her fails to recollect her beauty with pride and thankfulness. But on board, wherever there was foothold for 2 men, there seemed to be making an effort at balancing. Her completion had been hastened, as on her presence depended the margin of superiority of the British battlecruisers over the German. Right nobly the builders had answered to the call for haste. Men drilling, men hammering, men taping, men painting, men furnishing, men rigging. Everywhere there were men. Below in the dimly lit depths of the engine room and the stokeholds, in every compartment and crevice you stumbled against men. And over all the huge cranes were slinging stores on board to fall amongst the working parties and add to the apparent confusion. In my small cabin, when I tried to enter it, I found 1 man wiring the electric leads, another painting, and a third fitting a telephone and a buzzer. If there had been room for a 4th, he would have been there. Only 3 days before the ship would commission, and then 1,500 men would be pouring into her. Was the thing humanly possible? All my long years of naval service combined to shout to me, absolutely impossible, to be answered by the haggard commander's assurance, It will be. It was done. How will be a mystery as long as life lasts. On a dark, dank, dreary morning of the 3rd of October, 1914, 1,500 men with baggage, and equipment left the train which had brought them from Devonport, descended on the ship, jostled into their messes in spite of the caulkers, wiremen, painters, shipwrights, and every conceivable class of dockyard workmen, chose their hammock hooks, between which their beds would be slung, got the cooks of their messes to draw their rations, and by evening the whole ship had settled down in a fair degree of order. When it came to turning in after a weary day, difficulty arose, prospect of which had been worrying the commander ever since he had joined the ship a month before. The peacetime complement of the ship was 900, and nearly 600 more men had been allotted to bring the ship's company up to war strength. No effort had been made to find slinging accommodation for the extra hammocks, nor were the necessary bag racks for the kit bags fitted. Of course, such trifles as racks for the dirty boxes in which Jack keeps all his personal knickknacks, mess tables, and mess tools were also missing. And though you might cram extra men onto mess stools alongside the mess tables, there is no way of hanging 2 hammocks from the same hooks. Space had to be found for these extra men somewhere, and this duty fell on the overburdened shoulders of the commander. The work not being made any easier by the fact that the ship was still being completed and night shift deserts of dockyard men were being worked. When night came, those who had hammocks, billets allotted to them, turned in, whilst the remainder, not on duty, turned in as best they could on their hammocks laid out on the mess decks. I went to bed, but not for long. One of the newly joined had seen fit to attempt suicide by cutting his arteries at the wrists, but his anatomical knowledge was not equal to his intent. He turned out to be an elderly volunteer. With great trouble and much telephoning, I found a hospital in Glasgow, and he was transferred there to die shortly afterwards of acute mania. Some 20 officers had joined the wardroom mess, bringing us up to our usual total of 32. There were all sorts, R&R, our NVR, retired officers called up, and of course the active service people. They were as fine a body of messmates as one could wish to have, all specially picked for the ship, keen and competent. They had had one amusing experience on the way up. During the night, their train had stopped in a station of Midland town. The officers in one compartment were doing their best to sleep, when the door was flung open by an irate female. "There's some soldiers outside on the platform, here insulting me. Come out and bash them." Senior officer tried to explain, "We're not soldiers, we're the Royal Navy. We can't interfere. Get hold of the military picket." "That's nothing to do with me. Come out at once, I tell you, and bash them. Will you see a lady insulted and do nothing? I tell you, it's none of our business. Do you mean to tell me you won't bash them? No, of course not. Then what do you think we pay you for?" Muir train obviated the need for a reply to the conundrum. Like all ships commissioned after the outbreak of war, our ship's company at first was painfully inefficient. Perhaps 2/3 were regular service rating, and to them a new ship was merely a question of a few days in which to find their way about. But the rest of the reserves and the volunteers had been called up at the beginning of the war and allotted to the ships. Those sent to us were the sweepings of the recruiting officers, good men as they proved to be, once the service had taken hold of them and moulded them into her ways. At the beginning, they were a danger and a constant source of anxiety. This is a very, very cool book. It's really worth reading. Oh, good lord, I missed the log rations. Thank you, Rick Gosava. Yeah, Colin Cameron, I think you'll enjoy that book. The audiobook of Commander H. Spencer Cooper at the Battle of Falkland Lines. I think you'll enjoy it. Sam Freeman, where had this doctor been working before deploying to HMS Tiger? He'd had quite a full career. Again, this is a book, I'm not going to spoil it for you, Dan, but I'm going to put a link to it down below from Amazon. I think you'll be interested in it. I'll get it up and quickly put a link down below. Ow. My shoulder is really killing me at the moment. This is only available in hardback form as far as I can find it, but it is worth it. You should find a link to it down below. That's a good one. It is a good one. Man. Ouch. Let's see. Also, where is the floppy Yamato? I haven't yet received it, but I might get one. Good to go with a fluffy torpedo. Oh, Richard. I am trying to give us on to naval history this evening. I have to admit, I am trying to. Van Thompson, in the good old days of British shipbuilding, everyone was a feat unto itself. Pity they were so mishandled and lost to the high seas fleet. Well, Tiger wasn't. Down treatment, I'd rather not get into the actual skills of doing that. Don't take this the wrong way, but yeah, I'd rather not get into details of how to do that. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to delete that comment. Thank you, Sean B. Let's turn. If the RN catch Bismarck and Prince Jürgen between Scotland and Iceland, how much trouble are they in? A lot. If it's the force that's out there to hunt them. If you have them bump into Rodney and King George V earlier, then they have trouble. Especially if they bump into Rodney and King George V with one of the carriers in turn. Oh. Old Richard, were Iron ship surgeons commissioned officers or commissary staff? Commissioned. They were commissioned officers, but they were medical officers. So they weren't in the normal chain of command. As Stan Freeman's pointed out, originally they were a form of warrant officer, in that a medical officer, like a ship's carpenter or a ship's gunnery officer and the ship's master, were commissioned with a warrant rather than were given a warrant from the Admiralty for their service, not a commission from the Crown. But things sort of change over a while. They do have a commission by this point. The Bora Class catamaran. Oh, see if I can find a decent picture of it before I talk about it. The Bora Class. I don't know. Can we find a decent picture? They're technically more a form of hovercraft than catamaran, but we'll leave that on one side. Did it? No. How's that? Tiny, that picture. I want a large picture. I need a large picture for the screen size. Hey, caramba. Oh. Are they? Thank you, Reddit. Not sensible. I've got to I've got to remember. Please, if you see me going to use this shoulder or this side, tell me off. Because it just hurts. And it's stupid. Here we go. Here are the Bora Class. Now, talking about the Bora Class is always kind of interesting. Because they are theoretically the answer to so many problems. But there's ultimately a reason why the Russians only built 2. They're still in service now. They are technically a hoverborne, not a hovercraft, guided missile corvette. And they are armed with let's see, some 2 quadruple MT-206ME launchers for the Mosquet cruise missiles. That's the big quads. They have an OSA surface-to-air missile system that comes with 20 missiles. They have a 76mm, well, 76.2mm. They have 2 30mm Gatling guns, which are theoretically the Russian close-in weapon system, but I'm never quite sure about their viability. They also carry man-portable shoulder-mounted surface-to-air missiles, which is why I worry about the 30mm. And some naval machine guns, and an anti-saboteur grenade launcher. They can apparently still operate in combat form in a Sea State 5. I'm not quite sure about that claim myself. They have an endurance of 10 days. They have a top speed of 55 knots, but they have a 12-knot cruising speed. They have a range of 2,500 nautical miles at 12 knots, but they have 800 nautical miles at 55 knots. And the thing is, these are very much coastal defense ships. They are assigned to the Black Sea Fleet, and whilst the future series are planned on this, we haven't seen them come about yet. So my thinking is this. They are an idea which is very interesting and very capable on paper. But the reality has turned out to be, how do I put this? For a navy which you think is always pursuing, and the Soviet Navy is the Russian Navy, I'm sorry, and the Soviet Navy before it was always pursuing ways to try and be as financially cost-effective but powerful as possible for that cost as they could. They surprisingly have been very unenamored with pursuing this. So I think, honestly, I think it's kind of like the ideas which led to the LCS. The amount of compromises you have to make for that high speed don't necessarily provide you with a capable asset in the end. And yes, this is a very powerful missile boat. But ultimately, maintenance and in other things, it's in a bit of a trouble. Because here's the thing, when you go for high speed on a ship, it sounds great. Yes, it's got 55 knot speed. But aircraft have hundreds of knots of speed. Okay. Well, Well, what? This ship is operating in the Black Sea and coastal regions. By definition, is going to operate in the range of aircraft, especially for Russia when it's looking around. Russia is not really thinking about fighting anyone below a peer power, because if they make forces which aren't capable of fighting peers, and that's basically admitting that they don't have the money, and so therefore they tend to not push that one. And also the fact is most medium powers have quite capable air groups, which can take out something of this. And that ultimately becomes its problem. And that's ultimately a problem for battle cruisers and every ship designed for high speed since about 1942-43. Yes, you've got speed, but that isn't going to help. What you need to be is part of a battle group, and you need to be able to do the range and have enough firepower you can defend yourself. Ugh. Nighttime Productions. If HMS Sydney somehow makes it back to the port after the fight with Cormoran, maybe the torpedo missed, but she still has upwork damage she suffered in our timeline. What happens to her? Is she written off? Scrapped, repaired? Repaired. HMS Sydney. The Australians would want to repair them themselves, though, so it could take forever in their yards. That's it. Could a modernised Queen Elizabeth battleship ever even catch the Bismarck? Probably. Because it's not the top speeds you have to deal with, it's the rough seas. And rough speed of them. Let's use Warspite as the example. Warspite, as modernized, has a top speed of 23 knots. Bismarck has a theoretical top speed of 30 knots, but a cruising speed of 19 knots. Where she can do 8,000 nautical miles. Look, if you've got Bismarck going all out, yes, she can probably outpace a Queen Elizabeth, even a refitted Queen Elizabeth class. But that's if she's able to go all out, if she hasn't been damaged in any way. And that's also if you haven't got aircraft and torpedo bombers coming at her. And that's the other problem. If you're talking about meeting in the Scottish Iceland Gap and meeting that somewhere, you've probably got Victorious sitting around. In which case, that's torpedoes. Oswalski, were the Splendid Cat's armor enough against laughable small guns or German battle cruisers? Well, they seem to take quite a lot of damage in various other engagements. So we often use the comparison of Jutland, but at Jutland, HMS Tiger takes a lot of damage, as she does at Dogger Bank, and still keeps on fighting. So it's capable, but is it enough? Who knows? Sonic Nero, that's how long is the police's string? I know Drac has a thing about the cage mast battleships of the United States Navy. I have to agree that some of them are pretty weird, and I'm not particularly keen on them. But There are some quite looking ships out there. Russians certainly built some weird ones. Dan Freeman, physicians are doctors because they went to university and were academically trained, albeit before about 1900 fairly useful. Speaking as a member of the Royal College of Physicians. Hello. My experience with the third Pfizer jab was a softball-sized welt on my left shoulder. It took about 6 days to fade and was sore the whole time. Good luck with your third jab. Currently, it's pain on this side, and yeah, shoulder and hip really, really hurt, but so does the arm and leg and the whole side. How long could it stay at 55 knots? Roughly 800 nautical miles. So we are probably talking about probably about 13 hours, 14 hours. Probably 13. A little bit under 13, so a little bit under half a day at 55 knots. Yeah. Back in a second. Someone just coming to my door. I don't know why it's put back to that again. Yeah, no, I'm coming. Yes or no? You're worrying about me. Dead Eddie. Oh, ow! Actually, won't stop interrupting me. That means I keep. That means I have to get up. First one. What navy would have the best use of the Bora? Philippines, probably. Lol, I was Anok. Looks like I was just gonna say it looks like it has more punch than the LCS. Probably more punch than the LCS, but actually you're gonna hear somebody say something strange. The LCS probably is more useful than the Boros. Because I wouldn't want the Boros will, but the LCS will actually support helicopters and troops and actually useful. Next one, Dodge C. If Bismarck suddenly appears on the near horizon to UK carrier group without a battleship, what happens next? Okay, if you have a carrier group, a carrier operating without a battleship or battle cruiser, which is quite rare in British practice, they usually have county or town class cruisers at present. For starters, they probably will launch a strike if she manages to get close enough they can see her on the horizon. But you must remember again, carriers tended to have far better function. Were the earliest adopters of radars, had air search and surface search pretty early on, so it's slightly more difficult, less likely for them to get surprised. So they would probably have an aircraft up wandering around, especially after the incident with Courageous. And the loss of Courageous and Glorious had pretty much managed to make the RN set certain things in stone, and one of them was you will have aircraft airborne looking out for something to coming hunting you. Also, usually that a carrier is going to move in a battle group with an actual escort. This is why Force H usually has Renown or Hood with it. And Sheffield. You know, Victorious, when she's moving around, usually has a hefty cruiser escort. In which case, the cruisers probably make a dive for Bismarck. It's going to be a variation on the River Plate doctrine. Attack as fast and as hard as you can from as many points of compass as you can and overload her with small gunfire. Yes, she's got big, powerful guns. Yes, any of them hit, you're going to be in serious trouble. But your job is to keep her busy to buy time for the carrier to get away and to launch aircraft. So if Bismarck gets caught by Victorious on her carrier group, she's dead. She probably has a lot of torpedo bombers coming after her. She possibly, with Victorious, has a lot of aircraft attacking her and strafing her, because it'd be a case of... This is going to sound strange, but if Bismarck is that close to your carrier, you're launching everything. Fighters, torpedo bombers, the lots. So she'll be getting strafed. The whole idea would be to overload her. The whole idea would be to send as much as you can to possibly overload her and make her just basically go, we can't deal with all this. That will be the entire doctrine. And there's probably destroyers as well, so expect destroyers to be going in for torpedo kills. Knowing the British and their cruisers, they'll be trying to get torpedoes launched. Bismarck would be dealing with a lot of firepower coming its way as quickly as it physically could. So, anyway, what would be the best ship for a West African nation be right now? I'd probably be looking for something like a Type 31, small crew but large and modular. If I was looking for... It depends. If I'm looking for something which is an ocean patrol vessel, I'm probably looking at... Well, I'd honestly be looking at the Dead Poets. The Irish ones. But if I'm looking for a two-tier navy of OPVs and some frigates that can support them, I'm probably looking at the Type 31 sort of bracket. If I have got the money for a new ship. Anything else is a bit too expensive and a bit too high-end for me to afford and train up to. I could go Chinese, but if I go Chinese, that's making a big statement. And I might not want to do that. And everyone else, I'd be ordering off their design books, but not their actual production list. And that's the thing. If I order a Type 31, it's in production, and it means it's the Royal Navy is going to be using it, so I can jump onto their training and their systems development, most likely. Let's see. This is my most current shoulder on mine. Enjoy. Thank you. This mark appears in the defection range of the Queen Elizabeth class carrier battle group. How well would it do? current carrier battle group has an Arleigh Burke in it, and some Type for F-35s. The F-35s don't, I think, actually have any anti-ship missiles current loaded, but they do have bombs there. So probably getting some various bombs dropped on her, and also the detection range of HMS Queen Elizabeth is a lot longer range than Victorious with her thing. So bombs, various forms of harpoon missile, possibly some tomahawks, and more than likely an astute class firing torpedoes at her. Sam Thompson, if you copied the Yamato plans, kept them still as Japanese, but put in modern engines and added in a lot of missiles, and basically modernized its crew structure, etc., it wouldn't make the Chinese scared, but the Chinese would probably copy it. I often did wonder if the Americans did plans and ideas for a nuclear-powered supercruiser are one of the things which sparked the Soviets going off for their class. It's an interesting idea to think about. For the Kirovs. So, Karen, now that you mention it, if Hood had been in Renown's place, and vice versa, would Renown be sent with the Prince of Wales, or an actual battleship be sent instead? Probably Renown would have still been sent. Because it's a scratch group. It's putting together what's available. And you have to remember that. They are putting together what's available. And again, they're putting together what's available, what can get there quickly. And what can get there quickly is Prince of Wales from position it is in, and the battlecruiser Hood, which was with it, which was near enough by it. So that's what they're doing. They're sending the fastest force they can to get there. More interesting question is if Renown and if you have some sort of scenario where you have Renown and Hood and Bismarck there, and Renown and Hood and Prince of Wales turning up. But honestly, there is some interesting discussions to be had about Prince of Wales. And that's probably going to be had in the Force Z Village Pump special, which we still got to record the final part of. As Step Squad says, Bismarck is probably sunk by guided bombs. The only problem I have with her being sunk by guided bombs is I'm modern bombs, I'm not sure, designed with the idea of armor penetration in mind, so it would probably take a few of them to bash her. They would, let's put it this way, you get the first aircraft bombs would hit the various targets and would weaken it. The next set of bombs would go through. Dr. Clarke, your stream just got a COVID-19. Get your latest information from the CDC warning for US users. Go get your... Please, go get your jabs. Frank Son, Dr. C, if the Channel Tunnel existed during World War II, what would have happened to it? Blown up. Or filled with water. Dan Freeman, yes. Well, we might actually have to use you for that. Oh, sugar. Sugar. Do you know what's really funny as well? Is I get the injection in this arm and I've got no pain in it at all. every single time the injection goes in the left arm, and it's the right side which hurts. No idea why. My GP just tells me I'm unique. Fudgical. It's worth it though. Please go get it, because the reason I got it, the reason most people have got it, I know, is because, or especially people, if you live with shielded people and you see the fear that goes through them. My mum and sister are petrified. And the whole point is to build a, how do I put it? Not a, you can still, you transmit less, you're less likely to transmit, but you're also less likely to get sick. So you sort of build a sort of bubble, a defensive bubble around the people who can potentially get sick, which is helpful. Bad guy, 889. Did US battleships always patrol armed battleships when on patrol for turpits? Not always. Not always. But there is a reason that when Scharnhorst is engaged, it's a solo British battleship. But they do try and be around when there's big convoys going through. Was combining a battlecruiser and battleship a good idea? Maybe battleship and battleship and battleship and a battlecruiser and a battlecruiser and a battleship? Probably. Honestly, I would have said Hood and Renown should have been with Ark Royal in a fast group to cover the Atlantic. And it should have been battleship. It should have been battleship and battleship. But here is the thing. In the end, you wanted a fast group. And they were going with what's available. And as I keep harping on, you fight a war not with what you have on paper, not with what you have, but what you have available. And what they had available at the time was Prince of Wales and Hood. So Prince of Wales and Hood, go. Yes, I am on painkillers, sure, Matt. But I have to admit, this probably won't be going on to 10 o'clock or later. This might actually be ending at about 20 past or 9:30, so I can go in and get some more painkillers. As the painkillers I have, the pack has run out, and I am getting due for some more. I had fun. I didn't get much sleep last night because it was... Let's put it this way. I didn't want to take painkillers because I don't like running to drugs. And I that's my personal thing, not something I advise other people, but this is just me. And so I didn't take painkillers until about 4 a.m. this morning, when I gave in and went, yeah, fine, I want to get some sleep. I only had it yesterday. Sovietsky Skyo's battleship was good design. We'll never know. It wasn't actually ever built, but it would have been an interesting ship. Let's put it this way. If the Soviets had had a battleship in service, an actual modern battleship in service, that would have had an overwhelming impact on the Germans. Because I can send Bismarck, Tirpitz, Scharnhorst, and Eisenhower to go do the operations I do if I'm Germany in World War II, as long as I don't need that battleship to possibly help me deal with a Soviet battleship. And that's the thing. A Soviet battleship has a big impact on us, on the Germans. The local gas station I know was an anti-vaxxer. Ouch. Now the whole gas station is closed and the owner is in a coma. Ouch. Bud guy, I don't know, which COVID vaccine did you get? I had AstraZeneca, and Pfizer for my third one. Hmm. 9682131. If the nuclear-powered Virginia-class Aegis cruisers got built, which likely there would be 7 as 11 the plan overall. Probably more than 7. What do you replace them with? Probably they get replaced with more nuclear-powered ships, because if you do get 11 Virginia, probably would get 11, because the idea would be to have 1 or 12, possibly, because your aim would be to have 1 per carrier. So each carrier group would be centered around a nuclear cruiser and a nuclear-powered carrier at your core. And then you have your Arleigh-Burkes and other things around it. And there was a good idea for that, because honestly, that's building escorts which can keep up with your carrier. Nuclear-powered lasers are actually possible. They are possible, but it's getting the attenuation to work and actually delivering the energy to where you want it delivered. And I would have liked nuclear-powered cruisers, but ultimately, yeah. Senator, ibuprofen is the key against COVID vaccine pain to my cruise. I hate ibuprofen. It does really weird things too. For some reason, every time I have it, ibuprofen really destroys, really mucks up my stomach. So I tend to just stick with paracetamol. But please note, I'm a doctor of history, not a doctor of medicine. That's Dan Freeman. Gasberg, remodeling airstrike versus Bismarck. After the flak shaved off by high explosive bombs, then put a brimstone or 2 into each main gun turret? Probably. I can see various things being planned by various pilots. That's good. In that case, well, yeah, they could revert to type and try and get payment for capturing Bismarck. That'd be rather interesting. Considering the Marines they carry aboard HMS Queen Elizabeth, if you take out the flak, Merlin helicopters swoop in and start dropping off Royal Marines. How was the Red IJN book in front of Honey? It's very good. It's Mark Styles' book. I've done several reviews of it in the past. It's always worth a read. It's a good book. Thank you for reminding me about my shoulder. Mishotes, I was nearly assigned to one of the Virginia-class cruisers in 1979 when I finished nuclear power training, but had volunteered for submarines. Sitting here, I wonder how weirded out my professor is going to be when I give her a YouTube video as a source for a quote. I to Seneca's professor. Dan Freeman, do we think the RN has young officers work out how to take out something like Bismarck with the modern kit as a planning exercise? Oh. Ooh. There's one problem, Steve. The RN don't use Mark 48 torpedoes. They use Stingray and Tigerfish. Stingray more on these days, so that's what would be a fire. Well, Stingrays tend to be auto fitted to the ships and helicopters, and then the Spearfish, which is the other system for the astute. So it wouldn't be a Mark 48. It would be a Spearfish, possibly a Stingray from a helicopter if you're talking about helicopter operations, but not a Mark 48 from a British ship. And look, that sounds like Admiral Gallery. Aye. I like the idea of brimstone missiles for on rotation. We all do. Dan Freeman, we all do. If the modern Queen Elizabeth was in the South China Sea, gets visited by, which is in the South China Sea, gets visited by Bismarck, then she'd probably send for Bayern, which is now stationed in Japan, to talk to Bismarck and calm her down. Possibly. I don't think she's in the South China. I'm not sure. Is she back in the Indian Ocean already? I think she's heading this way home. Well, let's be honest. Bismarck is now a vessel of unique design with unparalleled historical authenticity and value. So depend when she disappeared. If she disappeared post Hood, but pre her sinking, and her crew somehow travel through time with her, and she appears in the South China Sea, I'd say they could get enough prize money that everyone could be quite happy. Right. What I've said is, I'm going to end about half past 20 to 10. So, because then I'll go in and get my next set of pain meds. Ouch. So, Scott, if Bismarck disappeared again as magically as she appeared, would the crews be required to return prize money payments? Only if you could get it off them. Frank Scott, let's see. In modern warships, would you use the prison ships? Which to use? You wouldn't want to use any modern warship as a prison ship. You probably have to, if you were going to use anything, you'd use an LPD. But you wouldn't really want to use any modern warship as a prison ship. They're really not designed or spaced out to be and they don't have the hotel facilities, etc., needed for the prison support. Because the trouble is, if you're going to design a prisoner ship or a prison, you need to have almost walls within walls, and you need to have the ability to close people off. And whilst you can close people off in sections, it's not really a ship isn't designed for the way that a prison does. Hmm. So, bombing travel Bismarck could be against the Hague Convention of Historical Artifacts and Places? Only after she stopped fighting back. Hang on, let's see, have you ever been on an LPD? What's it like? I've been on a few in my time. Spacious. In places. The well deck is bigger than you can ever imagine a ship's well deck space is going to be. And if you're standing in it when it's empty, when there's no landing craft in there, and the gates up at the back, but she docks down or ramps up, and you got a harbour floating around, and landing craft come in and out at high speed, dock in, offload vehicles, and get going. It's a process. The British ones have almost what you call a sort of, well, they have a wooden walls actually, quite often built down them as things that can the landing craft can bash into and not get hurt. So they to allow for higher speed operation, because if you make it very strong, so that if they bash into something they get damaged, you have to operate at slower speeds. If you want things to operate at higher speeds, you have to design in things for them to bash into, because they're going to be going faster, and when you're going faster, a small error means a bigger mistake. So they're cool though. They are cool. Let's take 6831. Argentina used a Brooklyn class light cruiser or Brazilian ship. That's Argentina. Frank Spada, I just noticed your Justinian book. How was Justinian? Pretty cool, and it's again, I talked about that book last week. Rodgaard 9. Who is the best main gun system currently at sea? Ooh. I'm a fan of some of the Russian doubles because they are very, very mechanically interesting. But currently at sea? Probably it's the, well, Otto Malera's 127, isn't it? Oh. I would say the Otto Malera 12764 is probably my favorite. And I'm, the Canadians have picked it up for their future, for their Type 26s. It's a good gun and a very capable weapon system. They have the 12754 compact, but I prefer the 64, and I think that's a cool system. I have to admit, I wouldn't mind seeing a 155 64 from Ossimalera, and I think they could produce a good 155. But yeah, they haven't currently got a 155 in service with the Navy. They've got a 155 on the in the self-propelled artillery section of life, but they haven't put on ships. I'd like to see it. I think the 155 is overdue a return, and honestly, I think I keep getting this feeling discussing with people and talking about, especially the long war concept and the realities of any war which involves any of the bigger powers. Things are either very, very quick, i.e. it goes nuclear almost immediately, or it goes on for a long time, in which case you're going to want those guns. And there's no point designing your force around it being very quick, because that means you lose by default the moment it's long. Whereas if you design your war around a long war, then if it's quick, you're still fine for it. And the other thing about the LPDs, if you go on Albion Bulwark, the command center. Holy guacamole. There's a reason why they've been used as fleet flagships. And there was an honest discussion as to whether or not the Queen Elizabeth class were designed with enough command spender space to take over that role. And that was something which had to be looked at over and over again to ensure they had enough command space. Johnson, did you hear about the Philippines narrowing it down to 2 close weapon systems? They do have a little competition going on there, it seems. Could be interesting. I've got something on the shoulder. Jonathan Murray, if you can bring any World War II ships back, which ones? HMS Nubian and probably HMS Eskimo. Tribal class destroyers. Probably, I'd like a Freudian Tartar back as well. Honestly, I'd like all the 4 tribals back from that survived World War II for the Royal Navy. Warspite. I would like a standard battleship back. I'm not sure which one I'd pick, but I'd make a sort of. I'd like one of those back. I'd like a British aircraft carrier from World War II back. Probably. Honestly, I'd probably pick Illustrious. If I was going to bring a German ship back, it would probably be Scharnhorst. I would also like Renown back, but that's just personal preference. But because I'd like a battle cruiser to have survived as well. Roma or Littorio for the Italians. Littorio, probably. I'm not sure if there's any French ones I'd like to bring back. Enterprise? Possibly, but Saratoga definitely for the US. Let's go ahead and add that to any good books on Second Anglo-Dutch War. Second Anglo-Dutch War. You're looking at Nicholas Rogers, Command of the Ocean. And got to keep remembering not to use this. Let's see if I can get to them. Ooh. There goes a knee. Ah. And Warfare at Sea, 1500 1650 by Jan Gleet. And Sea Power and Naval Warfare, 1650 to 1830 by Richard Harding. Those 3 books will get you through the Anglo-Dutch Wars quite well. Ow. I'm trying to find out what would it take to find HMS Cossack. I think we know where she is. If we don't, a good UV with decent 3D sonar. I haven't done a video on US nuclear cruisers. Okay, so once we run out of missiles, naval warfare goes back to guns and torpedoes. Definitely goes back to guns. Torpedoes face a similar issue as missiles. How quickly can you replace them? How quickly can you build them? You have to remember, the huge factories which churned out torpedoes in World War II, there aren't any like them these days. It's the same with missiles. If you look at the number, yes, you're talking about hundreds of missiles being able to be built, but look at how many are in a missile load, and single engagement, a single ship could fire as many as 48. Gauge is 24 targets, 2 missiles per target, boom, 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 that's 48 off. So, do you think they went with 155s on the Zoom multi-days with the thought of sharing ammo development costs for the army? I think that was probably an idea. I don't think you could reactivate the Iowa class, but Guy 8829. What are the spaceships on your shirt? Well, it's Endeavour. So there is a future landing module. There is a space shuttle. There is another future concept module. Well, probably something. And there is a sail ship. It's basically, these are some of the future sort of ideas of what they're going to be. This was a lunar landing module, and I think this is a theoretical Martian module. Five inches, 127 or 125 millimeter. Discord. Are there any other places that remained at war for a stupid long time, like Netherlands and Jersey? Berwick-on-Tweed in Russia. As Mitchell's point has said, and modern torpedoes like the Mark 48 are incredibly complex beasts these days. They are. No, they were incredibly, they were also incredibly complex for their time then. But the thing is, they already had the factories in existence, and they had an idea of mass producing them. These days, if you look at some of the weapons we're talking about producing, it's almost cottage industry factories. Once you start looking at the scale they're set up to build and construct. Let's see. There was a survey ship in 1912 that was sold in 1946. There's been an Antarctic support vessel for the New Zealand Navy, and a fleet tanker which was only decommissioned in 2017. I think this is one of the crew dragons. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of these ships is. And the Apollo 15 command module. So that was the Apollo 15 command module, I think. And this is, I'm thinking, one of the crew dragons of. I think I got it wrong. I think it's one of the SpaceX crew dragon ships. Colin Cameron. I think the World War II manufactured torpedoes still being carried in the 80s were actually decommissioned. Next carry out the Queen Elizabeth class? Who knows what the power supplies will be at that point. I have no idea on that question, Frank. So I would have to do a lot of study to think about that one. Thank you, Jonak. You got it right as well. I only got it right after I did some research. How much could you reuse as long lead items for Berks if you, or the USN, opted to change something new in design? Depends what you're talking about. As said, I've pointed out the most cost-effective and quickest solution they can implement for short term would be to take the power and hull design of a Zumwalt class and build that and just fit in the system, the Aegis and the radar systems of the Burke and probably the VLS, which you could probably do quite easily. Mitch notes, that would have been sensible. An 8-inch gun mount would have been sensible. They might allow people to buy the older Burks, but honestly, most countries which have looked at them, including Greece, have gone, because Burks are incredibly crew intensive and expensive to run compared to some of the modern ships, especially the European ones are tracking out. Re-torpedoes. The German World War II era G7E torpedoes took 1,200 man-hours to build, but the G7A initially took 3,700 or so. The Messerschmitt Bf 109F in comparison took to 4,200. Cool, Bijan. Aegis isn't the radar, Steve. Aegis is the command and controls integrated system. So SBY is the radar, and the latest type of pulsed phase array are the latest generation of SBY radars. Right then. It's now 3 hours and 41 minutes, and it's now into this, and it is now 20 to 10. And as said, I'm going to go and take my pain meds. So I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I'm sorry I haven't been my usual active, bouncy self, but I didn't want to not do a live because I didn't want to let you all down. But I am feeling quite a lot of pain. However, please go get the vaccine if you haven't. And I know there are various options and opinions out there. I would say, in my experience of talking to the medical professionals I know, all are fairly pro it. They all have their own codicils and nuances and contexts, and the vaccines all have their own strengths and weaknesses. I've had AstraZeneca, and then after I'd had AstraZeneca, people announced that people in my age group shouldn't have AstraZeneca, and well, I'd already had it and I was fine, so I didn't really bother about that one. It's up to you, ultimately. It is your own body, but when you have vaccines like measles, mumps, all those things for polio, etc., it's not about protecting necessarily yourself. It's about protecting those a lot weaker than you who might get it. And that's what we do it for. And that's why I've done it, because I've got my mum and sister, and I've got friends who've got their own issues. Oh. Oh. Night, Colin Cameron. Night to DG40. Thank you. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, Anook. Thank you, George Newman. Thank you, Seneca Nera. Thank you, John. Thank you, Peter Dawson. Thank you, Jonathan Burrow. Thank you, Dirt Squad. Yes, they should let you work for them. Thank you, Carl Gosworth. Thank you, Dan Prim. Why was Aegis not retrofitted to CVN65? Because it would require a lot of recabling. Good luck, Melanie 640. Take care, Bug Guy 829. Thank you, Bijon. Thank you for Gilix B. Yeah, I have to admit that in the nicest way, the list of things I'm vaccinated against and have to get vaccines against for travel, for dealing with various things I work in part of and I'm part of, and that require me to have vaccinations and be vaccinated against stuff. That's only chemicals in my system, frankly. One step more wasn't going to worry me. Take care, Mitchell H. Yeah, I thought that was going to happen, so that's why I didn't bother in the end. Take care, Knight6831. Thank you, Rick Sava. Thank you, 9640. Thank you, Shaw Mac. And take care, Frank Spudman. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Can you put you down as a reference? Dirt Squad, if you send me through your application on Discord, I will happily look through it and happily be a reference. Calvin Gosberg. Could be fun. Take care, everyone. That one.